Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. My name is Tony Payan. I'm the director of the Center for the United States and Mexico at Rice University's Baker Institute for Public Policy. I want to welcome you this morning to the Institute. I very much appreciate your joining us today in this conversation. As you well know, these are challenging times, like many others, however, so there is hardly anything new under the sun. Even challenging periods in history, however, have unique and distinct features, and the ones we face today, I'm afraid, are also different. They're the result of a combination of extremely complex societies and economies, which are accompanied by politics that have not evolved to match them with hard data and solid thought. Instead, our politics seem to go in one direction and the needs and wants of our societies and economies in a different direction. The incongruity between our politics and our social and economic landscapes is not inconsequential, however. It really affects many of our daily decisions, from individual and family decisions to business and corporate decisions. I think nearshoring, the subject at the core of this conference today, is one instance. The rising rivalry between the United States and China, going back to the Barack Obama administration, and accompanied by a stated intention to incentivize companies to move their operations back to the United States, reshoring, nearby, nearshoring, or to friendly countries, friendshoring, brought with it the promise of a reversal of Mexico's manufacturing investment slowdown when China joined the WTO in 2001. That promise was taking steam after the 2009 financial crisis, when Mexico changed political courses and reduced its own chances of taking advantage of a unique historical opportunity through the election of a populist, more nationalist government. Mexico's growth, in fact, for the past 7 years, has been averaging something closer to zero, between 0 and 1%, than the promised 6%. Then came also the presidency of Donald Trump, which, while pushing to de-link the U.S. economy from China's, has further complicated decisions for companies by turning the entire international trade system on its head and questioning, more recently, just yesterday, or a couple of days ago, whether the USMCA was needed at all. In Mr. Trump's political imagination, the U.S. can go it alone. Only history will tell if this is the case, but my money is on that it cannot. In the meantime, we are left as academics, as think tanks, as businesses with a moment appropriate to reflect on the future and perhaps, just perhaps, rethink our politics in the direction of working to make the future a better one. Despite these current challenges, I am optimistic. Those of us who live in Houston know optimism quite well. We know tough and getting through tough. In just a couple of weeks, we will enter the hurricane season, for example. Sometimes the storm comes, and we have to hunker down and wait, and things can get pretty rough. But we do know that every storm passes, and eventually we come back out to assess the damage, to fix things, to rebuild, to remake. I assure you, neither Morena in Mexico nor Trump in the United States are eternal. They will pass too. They too, like hurricanes over Houston, will pass. And we will have to reassess what a U.S. Mexico partnership should look like in the future. This is the main reason why we seek partnerships like this one, in this case with the Nearshore company, to take time to highlight the value of investment protection, free trade, and legislative and regulatory conditions that incentivize business decisions that create prosperity for all of us in both countries. Indeed, for over 2 years, we have partnered with the Nearshore company to hold a series of events to examine the preconditions that can take Mexico and the U.S. Mexico relationship into a stronger position to create a true North American platform, competitive with the rest of the world and beneficial to both Mexicans and Americans. The conference today is a key event in the series of activities sponsored by our friends in the Nearshore company. This project consists in the organization of workshops, we've had them, the production of reports, we're publishing them, white papers, policy briefs, to explore the ways in which we can create a path of economic prosperity for our region. And Texas, I think, is at the center of that. It's the big elephant in the room. So we want to thank everyone who attended this conference, our partners and associates, and our friends for helping us fund this project. We hope that this conversation will be fruitful to everyone here, and thank you also to those joining us online, as the event is also being streamed. Now, let me welcome a friend and partner of the Center for the U.S. and Mexico to open with a few remarks. Jorge Gonzalez Henriksen, co-CEO of the Nearshore company. Jorge will then introduce our keynote speaker and receive your questions at the end of the presenter's remarks. After that, we have a couple of very exciting and interesting panels, so please keep your questions. There should be some cards on the table for you to write down your questions for the panels, and there'll be a couple of folks going around picking them up. So thank you again for joining us today in this great conversation. And Jorge, where are you? You are next. There you go. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you, Tony, for those enlightening words and kind words. We're very happy with this partnership as well. Thank you so much. And thank you, Rodrigo, as well. I'm very excited for today's event. I see many familiar faces, friends, co-workers, and it's very exciting to see business people, academics, politicians, students, all in the same room. We're trying to figure this out. We're trying to understand what's going on, what's happening. As Tony said, this project started 2 years ago, in May of 2023. At the Nearshoring company, we were experiencing tremendous growth, and we saw that growth all along the border. And whenever I came to the Baker Institute, I noticed a very healthy skepticism around nearshoring. And I thank you for that, Tony. It was challenging. And I remember saying, well, I know the data says this, but this is what I'm seeing over here. So how are we going to figure this out? And you, between Rodrigo and yourself, came up with this project. As you said, it was a project composed of several workshops, each workshop focusing on specific aspects of nearshoring, infrastructure, energy, labor, safety, and security. And we took very deep dives. Thank you, Tec de Monterrey, as well. Some of those workshops were at the Tec de Monterrey, I remember. And the results were very interesting, very stimulating, thought-provoking papers. Some of those results will be shared today. And that is something that, again, is very exciting. As you can see, that's the word of today, of the moment. Uncertainty is another word of the moment. What's going on? As a business person, when I feel uncertain, I try to talk to experts. I try to listen to experts. I try to listen to them in podcasts. I try to read. And one group of experts that have been very helpful to me is the group of geopolitical analysts. And I'll tell you a very quick story. When I studied my college degree, I studied international relations. And I remember my father telling me, "What is that good for? What are you going to study international what?" And I went ahead and I did it. And I got my BA in that. And when I graduated, I thought, he was right. I don't know anything. What am I going to do with international relations? And so I went into finance. Whether that was a good decision or not, that's a whole different story. But I went into investment banking, and I became a banker. And I mean, international relations was very helpful. But today, I'd like to say that it's the first time in my career that I'm using what I learned in my college degree. But I do recognize that I am no expert, and not even an amateur. And therefore, today I want to introduce a real expert, the real thing in geopolitical analysts. His name is Jacob Shapiro. Jacob was introduced to me by Armando, my business partner, co-CEO, and he's not gonna like me for saying this, but it's his birthday today. So whenever you bump into him, say happy birthday. Armando introduced me to Jacob, and since then, Jacob, I'm also a big fan of yours, and I would even say even addicted to listening to your podcast. It's very enlightening, it's very clear, and thank you, because at least for me, and I think for many others, you are providing a lot of guidance in these very uncertain times. And so I have to read this because I want to introduce you, Jacob, as I think you introduce yourself, and I don't want to miss anything. Jacob Shapiro is a geopolitical analyst who provides strategic guidance to families, investors, and corporations. He is Director of Research at the Bespoke Group, a US-based wealth strategy firm that applies generational thinking to the preservation and growth of generational wealth for families around the world. His approach blends rigorous, empathetic analysis with deep confidence in human agency and the transformative power of new ideas. He lives in New Orleans with his wife and 2 daughters. And Jacob, just before I ask you to come here and talk to us, I want to share with the group that when I said Jacob is a real thing, I meant it. I mean, this is not just his research done in New Orleans behind a computer. Jacob went to Matamoros. You interviewed Jacob with, 10 or more business leaders in the region, key players on both sides of the border. And kudos for you, because you do blend that empirical research with theory and analysis. So thank you. So Jacob, the floor is yours. Thank you.
That's the nicest introduction I've ever had, and I'm not just saying that. Thank you very much. Before I get started, I begin every presentation I do with the same warning. So I have been apportioned the grotesque and profane task today of trying to speak to you about politics. All of you have political opinions. I also have political opinions. Not only that, I assure you that my political opinions are better than your political opinions. If you'd like to learn how much more correct and self-righteous I am than you, I will be here for the rest of the day. I am happy to debate you on anything that you want. But the reason I'm up here is not to give you my political opinions. With my political opinions and $2.75, you can get a cup of coffee at Starbucks. I'm here to try and give you an objective sense of what I think is going on in the world, specifically why I think nearshoring is a powerful phenomenon that is here to stay, and even more so, why I think Matamoros is at the ground floor of that opportunity. If I do my job correctly, you will not agree with everything I say. If you agree with everything I say up here, I have done a poor job. I am trying to push your buttons. I am trying to make you think differently. So that's my job. I will start and end with a thought experiment, and then we'll get into the meat of what I want to talk about. The first thing I want to ask you is, how many pairs of each animal did Moses bring on the ark in the Old Testament? Raise your hand if you think that he brought one pair on the ark. Others? More pairs? More pairs than that? 7 pairs? Okay, who recognizes what the problem is here? Moses. I said Moses. Moses didn't bring anything on the ark. Noah brought pairs of animals on the ark. Now, why am I bringing you this thought experiment? It's because your brain wants to ignore the political warning I gave you at the beginning of this presentation. It will complete things and ignore facts that are straight in front of it because that's what your mind expects. It is the hardest part of political analysis, recognizing the things that you deeply believe and are sure you know, and then realizing that the fact is completely incorrect. By the way, ChatGPT did a terrible job here. There's only one duck in this picture. There's like some weird-looking kangaroos. I don't know. Okay, I don't have a ton of time, so I'm going to try and do 3 things. I should only do one thing in a presentation, but I'm going to try to do 3 things and leave enough time for questions and answers. I'm going to try to talk to you about what's going on in the world. I'm going to try and talk to you about why I think President Trump is constrained in doing many of the things that he's talked about doing, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about nearshoring and Matamoros. One of the reasons I'm up here is that I wrote an entire report on Matamoros that we're going to publish with much fanfare soon to the public. I am not going to delve deep into the weeds with that. We would need hours, and besides, you can read the report. So I'm going to give you a taste of that, and hopefully it's enough that you will want to read it as soon as we come out. But my job here is to try and pull back and give you a sense of what I think is going on in the world. I've been doing this now for 15 years, and I've been talking for a long time about multipolarity. And multipolarity is just a fancy word to say that there is not one dominant power in the world today. It also implies that there are not 2 dominant powers in the world today. I do not think we are headed towards a US-China Cold War 2.0. That is not the argument that I would make. I think we are headed towards a multipolar world. I do not care how old you are. I don't care how much experience you have. None of you in this room have lived in a multipolar geopolitical environment. The last truly multipolar era was the 1890s. If you were around then, please find me afterwards. I would like to know the secret to living forever. Now, the ironic thing about that is that most of world history is multipolar. The aberration is what we have lived through for the past 50 to 70 years. So for the last 30 years, it was the United States. The buck literally stopped with the United States. The United States was the top dog. For the 50, 60 years before that, it was a bipolar conflict between the United States and the Soviet Union. Today, we have something different that is emerging. Now, this map behind me is a thought experiment of mine. I try to update it every quarter. It's not going to get everything right. The different countries that are aligned with each other are going to change over time. But when you're thinking about the world, whether as an academic or a business person, I want you to stop thinking about a global marketplace. It doesn't exist anymore. You can no longer just make a product better than anyone else at a cheaper rate than anyone else and sell it out into the global market and expect that someone will buy it. That was the unipolar era. That was the last 30 years. Now politics is going to matter a lot more. So as you can see here in dark blue, I've got the United States and its allies. China is self-explanatory in orange with its allies. Europe is in that ugly shade of teal. The red usually makes people stand up in their chairs a little bit. That's Turkey. And if you think I'm overstating there, they're building military bases in every single one of those countries that I've shaded red. I can't decide if India is going to take over the world or completely collapse in on itself, so I've lopped it into a group of middle powers and said, I don't know. I can make the argument either way. The point is not whether I have the groups right. The point is there are going to be groups. And ironically, at that top level, as we deglobalize, the integration between these groups is going to get more intense. So I'm arguing 2 things that may seem contradictory at the same time. The world is going to deglobalize in a multipolar geopolitical order, but countries that are in these regional groups together, they are going to integrate more. So all those countries that are in dark blue around the United States, more globalization, more free trade, more integration. That's what has to happen if I'm right about this multipolar world emerging. That can sound a little academic and ethereal, so let's put some meat on the bone. If you want to understand just what has happened over the past 25 years, look at the map in 2000 of countries in the world for which the United States was their largest trading partner. There is a lot of blue on that map. The buck literally stopped with the United States. Look where we are last year in 2024. All the red is China. Those are countries whose top trading partner is China right now. That is a seismic, absolutely massive shift. I don't have the adjectives for how big a shift that is and what has happened in global trade, and that's what we're dealing with right now. So this is not academic, it's not abstract, it's no longer a forecast, it's here. And we're in the very early stages of it, but it is certainly here. I want to give you another example of how this has worked historically and how it is changing one particular sector today. This is a deliciously ironic piece of data. It's showing you total semiconductor sales by U.S. firms and the U.S. government share of purchases of those semiconductors from 1955 to 1973. This is the height of the Cold War. It is the noble, capitalist, free market United States doing battle against the evil communist state-planned overlords of the Soviet Union. And here is the United States government being positively communist when it comes to the standing up of the semiconductor industry. The semiconductor industry in the United States does not exist if the United States government does not support it, does not buy more than 50% of their product at the outset of inventing these semiconductors. Now, why did they do that? It was not so that I could send cat videos to my wife in the hotel room last night when I was bored. It was because when you put chips on missiles, they're more accurate. And to win the Cold War, the United States had to out-innovate the Soviets, and the United States government decided it would be good for us to have a semiconductor industry. We will pay to make it happen, to make sure that we have the missiles that can win the Cold War. Now here's the thing, the United States did it. The Soviets could not keep up. And when the Soviets collapsed in on themselves and the United States was the undisputed superpower in the world, the United States globalized the semiconductor supply chain because it was cheaper. And we wanted to drive down the cost of all the things like our phones and our computers and the monitor that I'm projecting these slides on. We wanted to drive down the cost as much as possible, and free trade was the way to do that. And the net result was that there is no country in the world today that can make an advanced semiconductor by itself, start to finish. Not one. Not the United States, not China, not Taiwan. Everybody has a little piece of the supply chain and does their piece the absolute best. Taiwan has all the factories. Japan and South Korea make lots of weird chemicals and things that are beyond my expertise to know about. The Dutch, of all people, have a 100% monopoly on the equipment that goes into the factories in Taiwan that are then, they get the designs from the United States. I could go on and on. There is no semiconductor champion today. But what we are seeing in just the last couple of years is that everybody wants to try and be one. This is a collection of announcements for just semiconductor factory investments from 2021 to 2023. Just the factories, so none of the ancillary parts of the supply chain. I'm just talking about the buildings where you make the semiconductors. And China doesn't report this data, so I have to just guess. It's close to $1 trillion. So the tech companies that made all of this money, these semiconductors that made all of this money in the context of free trade, for the last couple of years, they have been throwing money at making sure they can build semiconductors in their own domestic markets. Whether it's the United States, Europe, China, even India and Turkey have semiconductor programs where they're going to be self-sufficient and vertically integrated. It's a massive sea change. And I often joke that tech is where the smart money is. And the smart money is telling you, go home, vertically integrate. Build things in domestic markets that you can sell to that market even if it's more expensive, because people will buy their phones. It doesn't matter how expensive they are, but you have to make sure you can make it in a market where you're allowed to make it. That's multipolarity. So that's the first section. The second thing I want to implant in your mind is some of what's going on today in the world and why I think the Trump administration will be constrained in doing many of the things it threatens. I think we need to have a much more sober approach to understanding what's coming out of Washington. They want to flood the zone with information. They don't want us to be able to parse what's real and what's not, and I'm going to try and help you do that. This gentleman that I have here at the center of the map, raise your hand if you know who that is. More than most audiences that I actually speak to. That is William McKinley, former U.S. president from 1898 to 1900. President Trump cannot stop talking about this guy. He loves William McKinley. And it makes sense why he loves William McKinley. William McKinley was a self-professed, quote-unquote, tariff man. He loved tariffs. He was a protectionist at his heart. He was president when the United States won the Spanish-American War and saw the United States extend its influence into the Pacific, had no rival anymore in the Western Hemisphere. The reason that President Trump likes him so much is because he fancies that we can go back to policies from the 1890s and early 1900s. I say this to say nothing that President Trump has proposed is that crazy. The United States has done it all before. Our history in the Philippines, our history with Cuba, our history in the rest of Central America, we have a long and deep-standing history of being an imperialist power. The problem for the United States is that it is applying imperialist foreign policy when it is no longer powerful enough to cash those checks. We are not overwhelmingly dominant anymore. More so than that, when William McKinley was president in the late 1890s and early 1900s, we were the China of today. We were disrupting manufacturing. We were stealing market share from the British and from the Germans and from everyone else. So of course it made sense to protect US industry in that sense because it allowed the United States to continue to steal that market share. So if you're trying to understand all of the different turbulence in US foreign policy right now, it's very actually easily explained. You have a Trump administration that is behaving like an empire and it doesn't have the imperial power to back it up. And that's why we're seeing all of this turbulence, because they have a wrong policy formulation. I think when historians look back at the year 2025, and I think when they write the history of this year, the most important thing that will happen is nothing to do with China, nothing to do with what's happened in the Oval Office, and I think it will all be about what the Trump administration did with Europe and how the transatlantic relationship has been irrevocably ruptured. This has been the key sort of American foreign policy framework since the end of World War II. In a sense, it's what the United States fought World War II for. And it all happened relatively quickly. You all probably have heard that Lenin quote, that there are decades where nothing happens and then there are weeks where decades happen. Well, a couple of months ago, we had a decade happen in a week. And it started with Pete Hegseth going to NATO and lecturing them about how they should pay their fair share for defense spending, more than 2% of GDP. Okay. If it had just stopped there, it wouldn't have been that different. Obama used to do that too. He just used to do it politely. Not that big of a deal. Then, though, a couple days later, President Trump called Vladimir Putin, didn't tell anyone, didn't tell any American allies, called Vladimir Putin and said, basically, why don't we figure out this Ukraine war together? Screw the Europeans. I think we can figure out a deal here between the two of us, don't you think? And then the next day, Vice President Vance went to the Munich Security Conference, a gathering where a lot of important European officials and defense officials and security analysts gather, and told them that European censorship was a bigger threat to Europe's future than China and Russia and all of these other different things. It was an absolute sea change in Europe. Europe has woken up and has realized that the United States is no longer a trustworthy ally. And no matter what happens in the coming months and years, I think that relationship is not going back to the way it was before. If you want a couple examples of just what that means, here's what Polish President Donald Tusk said just a couple of weeks after Vance spoke. He said that Poland might want to have nuclear weapons of their own. He said that every single Polish person needs to be prepared to serve in the army. That would take Poland's standing army to over 500,000 troops. He also withdrew Poland from different international agreements so that they can mine the border with Belarus, just in case the Russians decide to get a little bit antsy. That's Poland, arguably the closest U.S. ally in Eastern Europe, saying we don't trust these guys anymore. We need nukes and we need soldiers and we need mines. The U.S. isn't coming to our aid. The one that truly, I think, scares me, and this is where I cannot hide my political biases because my family fled Europe in the 1930s, the last time Germany militarized, was that we have gotten Germany to say, yes, we will do our fair share. We will start converting the auto companies and the auto factories and things like that to creating tanks and artillery and ammunition. Thank you for the push, Mr. Trump. And this is happening generally. Friedrich Merz did not acquit himself particularly well, if you have been following European politics this week, but just look at what Germany is doing, not the political melodrama. Yes, they're going to exempt defense spending. They're going to ease fiscal rules. So the austerity bros from Germany are saying, let's spend, let's blow it up. They've already allocated $500 billion to infrastructure and defense and things like that. That'll go into the trillions of euros generally. When Germany wakes up, the world changes. We've seen this movie many times. We will watch it again. Think a little bit closer to home. Think about, this feels like years ago now, but what was one of the first things that President Trump did? He picked a fight with Colombia, arguably the closest security partner that the United States has in the Western Hemisphere, and said that there would be emergency tariffs on all goods coming into Colombia unless Colombia accepted some illegal migrants that were coming in. And it got very bad. You had Gustavo Petro literally accusing Trump of being basically a white slaveholder and saying that Colombia is not going to tolerate this. We're not going to look north anymore. We're going to meet with the Chinese, and we're going to figure out how to make things go forward in a multipolar world. So when you're thinking about how all of this plays out in practice, all of these things have happened. And I think when you look back at the history, those are the things that we'll be talking about in general. Now let's talk specifically about some constraints on Mr. Trump. I've been reading this book, The Construction of Gothic Cathedrals, lately. It's by John Fitchen. If you're having trouble sleeping, I highly commend it to you. John Fitchen is an archaeologist. He's a historian of archaeology. And he set himself a very interesting mission. He wanted to understand how people in the Middle Ages created Gothic cathedrals. How was it with the technology that they had at the time, were they able to create these cathedrals in Europe that are so magnificent and so beautiful? And he put this as his mission because we have forgotten how to do it. We can make cell phones and airplanes and all these other different things, but we have no earthly clue how the stonemasons at the time in the Middle Ages actually worked the stone in order to create these cathedrals. I could have given you another example here. Another example of this is the pyramids in Egypt. We have no idea how the ancient Egyptians made the pyramids. There are completely reputable, legitimate experts out there who will argue with you that aliens must have constructed the pyramids because there is no other explanation for what could have possibly happened. Now, why am I talking to you about Gothic cathedrals and pyramids? The point I want to put in your brain is that civilizations forget things, and they forget how to make things. And it doesn't take that long to forget how to make things. If you're out of the game for a generation or two, you might lose that expertise. And if that bleeds into a century, you might have that knowledge lost to you forever. And if you want to know the big constraint on the Trump administration and why I am truly so bullish on nearshoring, just the one-sentence version, it's because the United States has forgotten how to make things. We do not make things in this country anymore. If you look at world's biggest manufacturing economies, we are roughly 12% of global production. The Chinese are 35%. The rest of the world is 31%. If the rejoinder is, okay, that's fine, Jacob, but the Chinese just make umbrellas and furniture and non-complex things. The really innovative stuff is still made in the United States. Okay, fine, let's do value added instead. We get to 16%. The Chinese have 29%. The rest of the world has 31%. This goes back to that McKinley point. There was a time when we dominated this chart. We don't dominate this chart anymore, and we haven't dominated it for decades. And this is not the type of thing where you snap your fingers and issue an executive order, and suddenly we're going to make things here again. We don't know how to do it. We don't have the expertise. We don't have the human capital. We don't have the infrastructure. So if you're going to do this type of thing, you would need an Operation Warp Speed for manufacturing that would have to be orders of magnitude bigger than what we did with Operation Warp Speed with COVID. If you think I'm overstating the case, let me blitz through a couple. Let me overwhelm you with the extent to which the United States does not make things. We make less than 1% of all the ships that are constructed in the year every year. The much vaunted U.S. Navy, which is the key symbol and really executor of U.S. military power in the world, we don't make our own ships. Sure, we have 270 of the greatest ships the world has ever seen. Once they're sunk, we're screwed. The Chinese are pumping these out by the hundred every day. Critical minerals, we've basically outsourced all of that to Canada and China. One of the families that I work with, they're starting up a company that is going to try and refine rare earths inside of the United States. Rare earths, by the way, poorly named. We should stop calling them rare earths. They're just earth minerals. I don't know. They're hard to refine. They're costly to refine, bad for the environment. I asked him a couple weeks ago, if you had a blank check from the Trump administration, and if you could cut through all the red tape, you had no problems politically whatsoever, how long would it take for you to stand up U.S. processing of these different minerals and commodities? His answer was 7 years. If he had no problems whatsoever, and obviously we have lots of problems. Solar, whether it's the wafers, whether it's the modules, the cells, China dominates here between 70 and 95%. They make all the solar panels in the world. How about the radios that go in cell towers, the creation of 5G, eventually 6G, automation and all of Internet of Things and all these different things that are supposed to change the global economy? They need 5G. They need these advanced telecom networks to function. We make all of 0% of the radios that go in telecom towers in this country. They come from China, Taiwan, and South Korea. That's the list, despite the fact that there have been companies that have been trying to do this in the United States for years. This is one that really blows my mind and actually pisses me off. Active pharmaceutical ingredients. We import most of the ingredients that go into our drugs from places like China and India. So the ibuprofen that I give my 3-year-old when she has an ear infection, probably some of those ingredients are coming from either China or India. They're not made in the United States. So if you start tariffing that stuff or embargoing that stuff, are we getting shortages of children's ibuprofen on the shelves? That's what tariffs and embargoes means when you get to that sort of thing. If you're talking higher value pharmaceutical imports, like say the contact lenses that I'm wearing right now, which were manufactured in Ireland, if you're thinking about advanced cancer treatments or blood transfusions, things like that, Germany, a big market there as well. The United States has gone after Europe recently. How about the ag sector? This is where the United States is preternaturally blessed. Well, fertilizer comes from China, Russia, and Belarus, and Canada. That's the list. We don't really make fertilizer in the United States anymore. Another project that I'm working on is on fertilizer. Agricultural machinery, we get 40% of that from Canada, the rest from China, Israel, and a couple of others. So I could go on and on about the things that the United States does not make, but we don't make them. And that brings me a little bit to China. This is in some ways my favorite map in the whole presentation. I want you to sit for a second with what it means to be a Chinese geopolitical strategist. China, the technical geopolitical term for what they are, is absolutely screwed. They are not in a good geopolitical position. They are tremendously weak. They are surrounded on all sides by U.S. defense treaty allies. South Korea is a U.S. defense treaty ally. Japan's a U.S. defense treaty ally. The Philippines, as a result of Mr. McKinley winning the Spanish-American War, a U.S. defense treaty ally. And Taiwan, not a U.S. defense treaty ally, but it's been the top priority of the Chinese Communist Party to reconquer Taiwan since 1953. And they haven't done it because they don't have the ships, and they don't have the planes, and they want to do what they did with Hong Kong. They have no appetite for taking over Taiwan. Anytime you read about World War III and China taking over Taiwan in the media, that is the U.S. Defense Department trying to justify its budget. It reflects nothing that's happening in actual reality. And this is honestly the thing that I worry about the most when I'm thinking about nearshoring. President Xi has a tremendously difficult task. It's not taking over Taiwan, it's about solving the problem of inequality in China. That's ironic because China is a communist country. They're supposed to be good at equality, but they're not. It's tremendously unequal. Parts of the coast of China are wealthier than anything we have in the United States. Some of those coastal cities in China make our cities look positively pedestrian by comparison. But the interior of China, where you have hundreds of millions of peasants still living on less than $5 a day, they might as well be living in a completely different universe. And Xi Jinping has to do something really difficult. He has to take that money from the coast and he has to redistribute it to the interior without A, the rich people coming for his head, and B, the peasants rising up because he's not doing it fast enough. He's in a terrible position, which is why he wants a deal. China does not want a trade war, and they don't have a lot of pride here. They will try to make a deal with the United States, and I bet that Trump wants to make a deal there as well. The worst thing that could possibly happen for nearshoring is if President Trump actually does make a durable deal with China going forward. I don't think that's going to be the case because I think Xi Jinping has in mind a short-term deal, but if you want to know the thing that keeps me up at night about my analysis, the thing that I think would make me wrong, it's if over the next 2 years Xi Jinping and Donald Trump become best friends. Because all of these different countries that I'm talking about, whether it's Mexico, Brazil, India, Indonesia, they can't compete if China and the United States decide to do what they've done for the last 30 or 40 years, which is basically join arms and make things as cheap as possible. I'll speak a little bit about Mexico before turning to Matamoros and then turning it over to questions and answers. Claudia Sheinbaum won Mexico's election last year with almost 60% of the vote. She has a supermajority, and not only that, when you ask what her approval rating is inside of Mexico, it is now sitting, as of March, at 83%. I am still waiting to meet a Mexican who is truly supportive of Claudia. I ask all my Mexican friends, the people I know, and they're all some shade of skeptical, or she's okay. But she has an 83% approval rating. So unless the polls are completely wrong, people seem to truly love her. Can you imagine, by the way, a U.S. president who had an 83% approval rating and controls of both houses of Congress? Can you imagine what kind of things would get done in that context? I tell you all this because I think that Claudia Sheinbaum has some motive towards trying to make Mexico more self-sufficient, but I think unlike her predecessor, she's a pragmatist. And I think she knows that what Porfirio Diaz is supposed to have said in the 1920s is still true today. Poor Mexico, so far from God and so close to the United States. And her job is to make the best deal possible that she can with the United States going forward. So it's nice, for instance, for the AMLO government and for the Sheinbaum government to say, you know what, we want to be more self-sufficient when it comes to food production. which is what that graph on the left there is saying. And then on the right, if you look at actual Mexican imports of the things they're supposed to be self-sufficient in, actually we've doubled our milk imports over this time period, or whatever you look at. So I think there is politics and there is reality, and I think that's the reality of Mexican politics going forward. The other thing is just that if you look at the top trading partners at a state level for all the different states in the United States, it's basically Mexico or Canada. So it's nice for President Trump to say a bunch of things and say he's going to do a bunch of things, but he's going to need Canada and Mexico going forward, which I think is a good thing. This is from La Jornada. This is the type of thing that probably they don't show Trump when they're in the office with him. He doesn't probably read Mexican newspapers, so he's not in danger of seeing the political cartoon. But I just liked it, and so I thought I would throw it in there. A last thought about constraints. I'm particularly worried about inflation in the United States. I don't think inflation is going to go one direction or another. I think we're returning to an era of volatile inflation. I think you can see that just about in a bunch of different statistical indicators. This is one of my favorites. This is what a can of Campbell's tomato soup costs over the last 25 years. If you want to know where Joe Biden lost the election, it's that jump from 2022 to 2023, where we went from 90 cents to over $1. It wasn't his buffoonery at the debates. It wasn't wokeness. It was the price of Campbell's soup went up more than 30%. That was the problem that he wasn't going to come back from. The Trump administration is saluting itself and patting itself on the back for having solved inflation. I think that's nonsense. The only reason the top line inflation numbers look good is because oil prices are in the tank. And oil prices are in the tank because the world thinks that the economy is going into recession globally. If you had even a return to the mean for energy prices, inflation in this country would look terrible. And then you would get all sorts of stories about stagflation and the Fed and things like that. Not only that, after Liberation Day, we saw meaningful constraints acting on Trump in real time. We saw the bond market call Trump's bluff and say, nah, yields are going to go up. They're not going to go down based on what you say. We saw the dollar do this. It's supposed to do the opposite if you're raising tariffs. The dollar continues to go down. I think we're in the early innings of a trend there. Mexican peso has been holding up pretty well against that. Hispanic support for Trump inside of the United States has also started to flag. He probably doesn't win as much of a landslide as he did if he didn't have Hispanic support, and already that demographic is beginning to shift away from him. So I won't go through all those things, but just to say inflation is yet another constraint that President Trump will have to deal with. So with my last few minutes, I want to talk a little bit about nearshoring and about Matamoros, and then we'll close with my last thought experiment, and then we can take questions, comments, and hopefully also your disagreements, because those are what are best for me. I find that nearshoring really has a much greater grip on the psyche of Mexicans and Canadians than it does Americans. For Americans, this is still a particularly foreign word. If you look at Google searches of nearshoring in Mexico versus the United States, you can see if you index it how Mexicans are incredibly interested in this concept, and the Americans have gone from 0 to 2 on the scale. So there are American companies, American investors who are out there who are interested in nearshoring, but we're at the very early stages of it. Now, I look at that chart and I see potential, because that tells me that this concept, it's not in the zeitgeist. It's not even close. The idea of nearshoring, it hasn't even percolated into Americans' minds. They're thinking about Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift and what bathrooms people should go into. They're not thinking about where they're going to get their goods in the next 6 to 12 months. And when, in the coming weeks, we see the real impact of Liberation Day and shortages on the shelves, not guarantee you, but I would be extremely surprised if that number right there, Googling nearshoring in the United States, did not increase exponentially. Matamoros, I think, is a place that is uniquely positioned to capitalize on this trend, and I'm not going to go through the full report itself, but the first rule of geopolitics is that rivers are important, and that if you occupy an important point on a river and you are connected to great powers through that river, you are going to be important. And one of the interesting things about Matamoros and Brownsville in general is that it has times in its recent history where it has been an absolute boomtown, where it has been a center of innovation, technological innovation, different cultures, different languages. If you go back and read the history that we've forgotten along with how to make things, there are time periods where this part of the world is absolutely incredible. And those times happen to dovetail with multipolar geopolitical environments, because you need these kind of trading outposts and you need rivers like this when you're in a world where the United States can't just call up China and say, yeah, we want to manufacture our things there, we'll put it on ocean freight and go across the ocean. And I think we're in a similar moment there right now. I live in New Orleans today. New Orleans, it's had a tough kind of run since Hurricane Katrina, but New Orleans is the most important geopolitical city in the United States. It's the bottom of the Mississippi River. When the Union and the Confederacy fought the Civil War, It was over as soon as the Union severed the Mississippi from the Confederacy. If you lose New Orleans, you lose control of the Mississippi. Matamoros and Brownsville are the New Orleans of the Rio Grande, of the lower Rio Grande Valley. And I'm not just telling you that, that's me shamelessly plagiarizing from economic analysts in the late 1800s and early 1900s, talking about the potential for this region in general. If you look in particular at Brownsville, which I think is going to be important for Matamoros going forward, and we're going to hear from the mayor later, it's a boom town. And I had a chance to talk with the mayor when I visited when I was in Brownsville. I had a chance to go around and see it for myself. It's absolutely booming. The population numbers are booming. Infrastructure is booming. Interest in the place is booming. SpaceX is there. You name it. A lot of different things are happening there. It's also booming in the sense that nobody has realized it quite yet. It's not like Austin, which is still booming, but everybody knows about Austin. Everybody wants to be in Austin because it's cool. Brownsville's not cool. The hipsters are not going to Brownsville starting pizza shops right now. They probably will in the next 5 to 10 years. When they have, this trend is too long in the tooth. But you're at the very early stages of this, and you can see this in the demographic trends itself, and that's also going to be good for Matamoros. In terms of Mexico's manufacturing production, I think this is also an important thing. We've had a big shift here since COVID. Since 2020, and that was the first supply chain crisis of the multipolar world. Liberation Day is the second supply chain crisis of the multipolar world, and I think it's going to play out here literally in the next couple of weeks. I think that we're going through a sort of COVID 2.0 for the economy when it comes to supply chains, except there's no stimulus forthcoming from the federal government. So I really do think this couldn't have been timed better for Armando's birthday, and also for the fact that I think we're going to have a real takeoff here in interest. The situation is not all completely rosy. When you just do some basic research on the quality of Mexican infrastructure, it's not even as good as India's, and that's not a good thing. India is famous for having incredibly poor infrastructure, and that's me putting it diplomatically. So if you want to know something I think needs to be improved, Claudia Sheinbaum, with her 83% approval rating, supporting infrastructure development and public-private partnerships around that to make these things easier, because for hundreds of years, literally hundreds of years, this has not been the smart thing to do. That's going to be really important going forward. And last but not least, if you look at nearshoring investment by state, you'll just see that Tamaulipas is sitting there. Basically, nobody has paid attention to it. It's got less than 2% of the nearshoring investment by state from 2021 to 2024. Now, I'm a natural contrarian, and I'm an investor, and I work with wealthy families, and when I see a region that geographically is primed for growth, that has all the advantages of all these other regions around it, but it's gotten a paltry, very small percent of the share that all the others have, I see good things. That's my investor brain talking. And all of the reasons that Tamaulipas has not gotten that investment, I think they're going away as the world becomes more multipolar and as interest in nearshoring continues to pick up. I'm almost at time. I'm actually 2 minutes over. So let me close with this thought experiment. One of the things I get asked most often is, Jacob, how do you stay sane? How do you stay happy in a world that seems to be collapsing all around you? And I say, honestly, you are genetically programmed to think that way. Some scientists in Nature put out an article in 2023. They had an incredible data set from the United States. They asked Americans from 1949 to 2019 questions like, is the world getting better? Is morality declining? Do you trust your neighbor? Will the next generation be good and grow and do all sorts of productive things? And 84% of the time, from 1949 to 2019, Americans said, the world is getting worse. I don't trust my neighbor. The young generation doesn't know what it's doing. I'm locking my door more at night. Over that same time period, not over that same time period, for all the countries that are in red here, we only have surveys from 1996 to 2007 for many of the same questions. I regard this as the zenith of human civilization based on the music that came out during that time period. And during that time period, for the countries surveyed in red, 1996 to 2007, roughly 80% of respondents said, the world is getting worse, I don't trust my neighbor, my children are not going to have a better life than I am. And these psychologists found two things. They found, number one, that our brains like negative information. It is like junk food for our brains. We want more of it. And social media has allowed us to basically put all of this negative information into our brains more and more. We sit longer on articles that are negative. We watch the local news and the terrible things that happened. When you're driving down the street and there's an accident, you're probably telling yourself, I'm not going to stop and look. I'm not going to stop and look. But of course, you're going to stop and look, and the traffic is going to go back for miles because everybody decided to stop and look. That's how it works. The other thing they found, though, was that we forget all the negative crap when we think about the past. So 20 years from now, we'll forget how the world was falling apart and how the next generation was terrible and all the other things that were pissing us off. In fact, if we're lucky enough to be here 20 years from now, I submit that I'll be asking you questions like, don't you miss 2025? Don't you miss how civil our discourse? Don't you miss how united our country was in pursuit of common goals? That's why we always think that the past is better than the present. So, thought experiment. This is a picture of New York City in 1896. I want you to sit with the picture for a minute and imagine what it's like to be there. There is no electric light, so you can imagine it would be pretty dark at night. There are no cars, so horses and buggies. You can imagine what that smells like in a New York City summer, not particularly good. The clothing is very stiff and conservative. Maybe you can even get a whiff of starch or something like that from keeping that clothing nice and stiff. So that's 1896. And that is Times Square in 1911, in just 15 years' time. The other thing about multipolar geopolitical environments is that they create the need, the imperative for innovation and competition and change. And I think over the next 15 years, we're going to see that sort of stepwise change. So I asked ChatGPT, what might Matamoros look like 15 years from now? And it gave me this. Probably not what's going to happen, but what I want you to take away, if you take one thing away from me, it is not to huddle in the fetal position. President Trump cannot do the things that he is threatening to do. That's my analytical call. And if I'm wrong, mea culpa, and I'll take you out to dinner, but I don't think he can do them. And I think the companies, the countries, the investors, the families who are going to do best in the world ahead are the ones whose vision of the future is more like ChatGPT's and not like the negative crap that we get fed on social media all the time. So those are my comments, and Jorge, please tell me why I'm wrong.
Thank you, Jacob. Take a seat. I'm going to sit for about 10 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes, and ask you a few questions. Everybody, you'll see these on your tables. Go take them, and we'll give them to me, and I can ask it. So, well, before I get into questions, I have one here. First, where's the mic? Is it here? We'll get it for you. Okay. 36. Thanks.
I have jokes.
Yeah, that silence was, maybe we would have needed a couple of jokes. So, Jacob, I have the first question for you, and I'm going to read it. It says, Jeffrey Sachs argues that China is in a much better position than we think and could win the trade war. You seem to say the opposite. How do you interpret what he says?
I'm sorry if I gave you the impression that I think the opposite. The first thing to say, though, is that nobody wins trade wars. Everybody loses. So the countries that are going to win the U.S.-China trade war are everybody except the United States and China. And if the United States expands its trade war to other countries, the countries that will win are all the countries that are not involved in the trade war. And there's been some really, if you're interested in like seeing sort of the background of that, there's been some really great economic modeling of what will happen from a growth perspective for countries like, say, Brazil or Indonesia if they stay out of the trade wars versus if they stay in the trade wars. I do think China's in a better position probably than most. I think they are in for a lot of short-term pain. I think they will get through the short-term pain. I'm not one of these alarmists who says that China's going to collapse in on itself. I think China has a period here of the next 3 to 5 years where it has major structural problems that it has to address in its economy. And it's going to be more willing to make deals. It's going to do things to try and get through that 3 to 5 year period. After that, though, yes, China's going to do very well. They are the ones who actually make things. So they do have their own problems, but I'm relatively bullish on them. And the other part of that question, I think many people are negative on China because of their demographics. And I actually sort of alluded to why I'm less concerned about that. Because you have hundreds of millions of Chinese people in the interior who haven't joined the middle class yet. So yes, China's demographics look terrible, but every country in the developed world's demographics look terrible. Not all of them have 300 million peasants that maybe you could redistribute wealth to and they start buying made in China air conditioners or made in China computers or made in China phones and things like that. So I was not trying to give you the impression that I think the United States or China will win a trade war. I was just trying to say, in the short term, China has enough weakness that I think will force it to swallow its pride and make a short-term trade deal. But China is here to stay, and I think will be a major pole and a major competitor in the world ahead.
So there's a lot of questions. So I'm trying to make groups here, and there are some common themes. So I'll start with the first one. And the first common theme is around safety or insecurity issues in Mexico. Specifically, I mean, in Tamaulipas, which is what we're talking about. And so what's your take on how that can affect nearshoring?
It absolutely can, and it goes back to what I said about negative information. If you do basic research, Google searches about Tamaulipas or Matamoros, the first things that will pop up are incidents that are related to security, not related to the city or the culture, or the economy, or any of the things that are happening on a daily basis, but something, some event that happened 2 years ago, or some event that happened 20 years ago, and that will dominate your Google search. And most people don't, I think it's 99% of people don't go past the third option on a search engine. So if you're Googling Matamoros, you're an executive and you're like, I like this, I like what Jacob Shapiro said, I read this report, I think I'm gonna Google Matamoros. Probably your first 3 results are gonna be cartel-related security issues. The concerns are not invalid. Security is a concern everywhere. I live in New Orleans, which recently took over from Chicago in terms of murder per capita rate in the entire United States. It's not particularly good. So you can have security problems wherever you go. My sense of being on the ground in Matamoros and my sense of looking at the data and how the Mexican government is dealing with security is that the situation has stabilized a bit. I think from roughly Calderon until AMLO, you had the splintering of the different cartels as there was this militant approach to go after them. And I think instead of these smaller splinter cartels that were fighting for turf, you're getting sort of centralization again in larger cartels that want stability. And I think you have cartels that want stability. I think you have a Mexican government that wants stability. There is too much money to be made to be focusing on these things in general. So only an idiot would tell you that security is not a concern, but security is a concern everywhere. And when I look at the macro environment, I think things are arguably better than they have been in 20 years. And I expect that if we're right about these trends, for things to get better. It's also the type of thing where you can have monitoring to make sure if I'm right. You will see in real time if I'm wrong. If you see smaller cartels splinter off and start to attack civilians or attack infrastructure or things like that, then I'm wrong. Then this model doesn't work, and then you need to sort of rethink these things. But I think we spend too much time thinking about that negative risk, and even though we need to think about that negative risk, think about the positive opportunities and also think about the things that are moderating those risks right now in real time.
Thank you, Jacob. The other group of questions is around Europe, the European Union. And more specifically, the European Union for many years has been an example of how to integrate different economies, different cultures, different languages. And North America, with 3 countries, we seem to be struggling way more and talking about building walls and all this stuff. And so there's actually 2 sides of this question. So the first one is, like, what can North America learn from the European Union example? That's one. And then the other one is now, given the uncertainty or the geopolitical multilateral world, what do you believe will happen to the European Union? Will it turn inward or start to split?
I would not regard the last 20 years of the European Union as success. In fact, I would regard it as the complete opposite. And I think the original sin goes back to the formation of the European Union. And once you form a bureaucracy, it's really hard to change it. So the European Union is not a true union in any sense. And they were not able to integrate all these different aspects of their economy, of their fiscal policy, of their monetary policy, and things like that. And they're paying the price for it now. If we had been talking even 5-10 years ago, we would have been talking about Brexit and austerity and about the divisions between East and West Europe and what the Central Europeans had to say. Europe has really been twiddling its thumbs for quite some time. I will say, though, I think Europe is going to change. Part of that is the Trump administration. Part of that is Russia returning to history and showing its true colors. Part of that is just that China was out competing Europe in a lot of the different areas that they were in. I think you've seen a real change in Eurosceptic politics over the last 10 years. Again, 10 years ago, there were true Eurosceptic parties that wanted to take their countries out of the EU, whether they were in Italy or France or some of these other countries. The Eurosceptics have been basically shuttered to the side. What passes as far right now in Europe is Giorgia Meloni. It's about getting more from the table of the EU rather than trying to split it off. So as for the future of the EU, I think the EU is going to have to get closer together. And I think it's going to have to look a lot more like a true union, whether that's monetary policy, fiscal policy, defense policy. They're going to have to make up for all the things they haven't been able to do over the last 10 to 20 years. To the first part of the question, I don't think we have anything to learn from the European Union. I think it's a completely different context. They have how many different nations and how many different languages and all of these other different things, and they were conflating all these things with ideals about what it meant to be European. Also, not a small part of it is post-traumatic stress disorder from World War II and trying to forget a really gross and heinous past of what happened the last time European states fought each other. We don't have that in North America. It's about the NAFTA and the USMCA and the relationship between Canada, Mexico, and the United States. It doesn't try to be something more than it is. It's about we are stronger and wealthier together. So let's make sure that we can do the things that actually grease these wheels together. So I would say the European Union is actually the wrong model to look at because I think they conflate ideals and policies and things like that in a way that is unhelpful for Canada, Mexico, and the United States. I don't think Canada is going to become the 51st state. I don't think Mexico will become the 52nd state. I think what really needs to happen is an updated USMCA as quickly as possible so that we can get back to business. And that's what North America has always done better than the rest of the world, get back to business.
I think we have time. Do we have time for one or two questions? Okay, so 2 questions. So the next set of questions are around why did everything, or let me put it this way, I'm going to rephrase it. For many years, it seems like globalization has created more wealth in the world than ever, right? The globalized model. So it seems like we were going into that direction. The world is flat, and everyone was very happy going into that with those ideas. But then suddenly, we have a U.S. President and a government that is saying, like, stop. We don't want to go. That direction is not a good direction. Could you talk a little bit about what in your mind, what do you think the world would have been if we just kept going into that globalize? What do you think was the world then? Would the world be in 50, 100 years?
I don't think we were going to go in that direction much further because, yes, globalization created great wealth, but it also, and this is true of free trade, even your most fervent free trade advocates will tell you that before free trade works in the aggregate, it increases inequality. So first you get a period of wealth, and then things will even out over time as everybody can buy goods cheaper and everybody makes the thing that they specialize in. And so what happened with globalization was exactly that. You had a massive increase in inequality all around the world. This is true in the United States too. If you look at our wealth inequality in the United States, it's higher than at any period in recorded history. And that includes the Great Depression, which is absolutely mind-boggling. And it didn't begin with Trump. It began in the second Obama administration. You could maybe even date it back to the 2008 financial crisis and the bailout of all of those different companies that the U.S. government oversaw. You saw percolating at that time a protectionist impulse, a doubt in free trade, a class of workers who were completely, they were left behind and there was no government support to help them in general. And that is the base of voters that not only elected Donald Trump, it was also the base that put Bernie where he was in 2016. And I bet if it had been Bernie versus Trump in 2016, I bet it would have been Bernie. If you look at how U.S. politics has morphed over time, it's that populist left behind group that is asserting themselves. So I think we had already reached the limits of these things. And I think that U.S. policy wasn't focused on taking care of the people who were left behind by globalization. That was true of most of the different countries in the world. So eventually I think we were going to have this swing back in the pendulum. Now, could we address those issues of inequality in a way that helps fix those and push forward? Maybe. Like, we could have a new era of globalization 10 years from now, 15 years from now, once we metabolize all of these different populist politics and make these changes and things like that. It's possible. It's not my base case. It's not the most likely scenario. I think instead we're probably going to have this more competitive landscape. But here in the now, I think whether it was, it doesn't matter that it was Trump. Somebody was going to be elected who was preying on these feelings of inequality. It was there in the data and in policy and anywhere you chose to look.
Thank you, Jacob. And the last question, the last group of questions are around Canada. Like, what is Canada's place and role in North America?
Yeah, you know, President Trump is incredible at winning elections. He's won 2 elections for himself and 1 for Mark Carney in Canada just recently. An incredible own goal by President Trump. When President Trump first came, when he won the election, it seemed like he had his finger on the pulse of Canadian politics better than anyone else. He basically said, Mr. Trudeau, you can exit stage left. I'm tired of dealing with you. I don't like you. And what might have happened was the Conservative Party winning in Canada, and you would get a Canadian government that might have been closer with the United States and willing to work along Trump's edge, which would not have been good for Mexico in negotiations. Instead, President Trump decided to do his 51st state nonsense and to double down, and basically handed the Canadian election back to the Liberals, who 4 months ago, were polling at 16%, and instead secured 43% going forward. So I think what you have in Canada, I mean, Canada is in some ways in much the same situation as Mexico. The thing is that Canada is not being overly pragmatic. They feel, it seems to me, wounded by this. And we have the emergence of true Canadian nationalism for the first time in my lifetime, maybe for the first time in Canada's history. And they're talking a big game. They're looking towards Europe, and they're looking towards the UK, and looking towards India, and all these things that they're going to do. This is where, you know, constraints also operate, though. Roughly 80% of Canadian trade, 70, 80% of trade, goes with the United States. So they can either do it willingly and politely, or they can do it fighting tooth and nail, and maybe they can get a couple of concessions down the road. But both Mexico, Canada, and the United States don't have a choice. USMCA has to be renegotiated. These economies have to integrate. All of these different things happening in the world. Like, this is actually one of the pitfalls of geopolitical analysis. I could be wrong. The United States could decide to shoot off its own foot just because it wants to, and that's a possibility. Like, geopolitical analysis assumes that actors know what's in their best interest. If Canada and the United States do not figure out their problems, it will be disastrous for both of them. And I think the United States knows that, and I think that Carney knows that. And so I really think you have to think of U.S., Mexico, Canada as different from all of the other things that are happening in the world around multipolarity. I think, unfortunately, it'll go till June 2026, because that's when the renegotiation has to be concluded by. But get out your popcorn. Like, it's going to be Carney versus Trump versus Claudia versus whoever else wants, all positioning and bargaining to try and get USMCA done. And I think it will be done because the alternative is catastrophic for all sides. So.
Thank you, Jacob. We could have you here all day.
I am here all
we
day,
don't have time. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. We're going to move straight into our first panel. So let me invite our guests. Rolando, please, coming up. And then Rolando Fuentes, professor at the Tec de Monterrey in the campus Guadalajara. Welcome. Thank you. Yeah, any chair over there. If you want to go to the middle or the left. And then we got Marco Fernandez, also from the Tec de Monterrey. They're quite well represented. Marco, I think I saw Marco over here. He may have gone out to get some coffee. And then we got Arturo. Arturo's actually joining us online, so I think they'll connect him in a minute. And then we got Congressman Maria Granados, a federal deputy from Chihuahua State in the Mexican Congress. Please. There he is. Hi, Arturo. How are you? Welcome.
Hello, Tony.
So,
nice to see you.
Oh, there's Marco. Come on in. Please take a seat. Yeah, just move up a little bit and. Marco, why don't you sit over here? You have a microphone. Let me remind you that on your table, there are some cards, and you can write your questions, and then there'll be a couple of folks picking up the questions, and they'll bring them over to me for the panel. There are two panels this morning. The first is a diagnostic panel. We're going to talk a little bit about where we are today in North America, of course, what's going on. There's lots of stuff going on, as we just heard this morning. And then once we do that, the second panel is going to be focused on the future. Where is the future? What needs to be done? So now we're going to focus on the problems, and then the next panel will focus on the solutions. So for now, I'm going to welcome our panelists here, and I'm going to give them an opportunity. Perhaps you can say your name and your affiliation, so we can save a little time, and then each of you will have 5 to 6, 7 minutes to give us your thoughts on your area of expertise. Where are we today? And then I will ask some questions of you, and we'll move to a Q&A session with the audience. So let's start with you, Rolando. You specialize and focus on energy, so
Yes.
Please introduce yourself and give us your thoughts
My thoughts on
on your expertise,
All right.
energy.
Okay.
Where are we in North America? Where is Mexico today?
Yep.
Where is the partnership between the two countries?
Okay. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for the invitation, Tony, and for the to the Baker Institute to join this very timely event. So I think I'm a research professor at EGADE Business School at Tec de Monterrey, and I'm also a non-resident fellow here at the Baker Institute. And my specialization is on energy. So most of my talk will touch that subject. However, I would like to take 2 steps back before I jump into energy. And I think, we all know that the rules of the game are changing. No, a lot of it has to do with disruption and some kind of, as the economist puts it, to find a method to madness. And I think Jacob also put it in that way. It's like, how do we find constraints on Trump? I mean, does Trump unconstrained? Can he do anything he wants? Can he impose certain solutions on different aspects, like peace in Ukraine, like illegal immigration, all those topics that he has touched on during his presidency? And this is mostly done through asymmetry. Yeah, he would like to impose certain concessions, both politically and economically, on Mexico, for example, or on Ukraine, Canada, etc., through the asymmetry that the U.S. has politically, economically, etc. Right? However, based on our analysis, some of those outcomes are not sustainable. They are not equilibrium. No, I mean, in economic terms, they are not an equilibrium outcome. Because basically, I mean, whenever you find an agreement that you think it's unfair, I mean, you will retaliate with anything that you have. No, we've seen it in Canada. I mean, the retaliation can be seen with the election of the exact opposite outcome that President Trump would like to see. And I think that is the problem that we are facing now. So these outcomes, these movements are sequential. They are not like a one-off decision where you impose peace in Ukraine or whatever and expect that outcome will sustain through time. Yeah. So what we explore is what are the likely outcomes and scenarios for that. Yeah. In terms of energy, for example, you also have that in the Mexican government, a drive for nationalism as well in energy, right? And sovereignty, that's what they called. The problem is that they see this sovereignty vis-a-vis the state and the private companies, the private firms. When you have, in reality, that Mexico imports 70% of natural gas from pipelines from Texas. So we don't have that sovereignty anyway. No, and I think that Mexico has to be more proactive in the way that it touches this vulnerability. Because importing 70% of gas from Texas, it's not trade, it's vulnerability. Yeah, so I think from the point of view of the energy sector, we have to think about rapid ways to solve these issues. Yeah.
Let me ask you about that. Follow up on with some statistics and some numbers and get your perspective. I think the reason why the USMCA works is because there is some complementarity between or among all three countries, and we saw some interesting maps. And as you mentioned, Mexico imports about 65-70% of its natural gas, which fuels electricity, power production or generation, and it of course fuels Mexican manufacturing. So Mexico is heavily dependent on that area. But I think Mexico's policy when it comes to hydrocarbons assumes that Mexico is hydrocarbon rich. My impression is that Mexico is actually a resource poor country. I don't see Mexico as an energy wealthy country. But the government plays as if Mexico could actually generate power and extract oil. We've seen the oil production drop fast, 1.3 million barrels of oil a day. The promise was 2.1, 2.2, 2.3. Clearly not there and dropping fast in the last year. So is Mexico's strategy at this point the right strategy to past Trump's tariff madness and whatever he's going to do over the next 3 years, truly retake the path of North American integration? Is Mexico well positioned in that area? Because frankly, in my skepticism, I don't see it.
That's an excellent question, Tony. And I think, I mean, the way that you put it, like, is Mexico a resource-rich country or a resource-poor country is an excellent one. Because, I mean, we can rephrase that question as saying, is the government policy on energy policy acting as if we were a resource-rich country or not? No, and this will make the whole difference. I think that the government is thinking that Mexico is still a resource-rich country. You know, they want to make Mexico great again in terms of energy back in the 1970s, when we have Cantarell and we have this mega basin where we can produce anything, I mean, up to $2 million barrels per day. Now, how do we define? Should we still defining a resource-rich country in terms of energy, in terms of the resources, or in terms of the technology? Yeah, because, I mean, yes, we can deplete our oil and gas basins. Gas are pretty much underexploited. But there's an energy transition going on the way. Yeah, and there's a renewable penetration. And Mexico, as well as Texas and California and other countries, are less dependent on the resources underground. Yeah, I mean, we have, good solar radiation, we have good wind, etc. But that's not enough. Yeah, we need the technologies. I mean, that's one. However, for example, I think that the winner technology in terms of renewables is solar panels. And I do agree that China is the main manufacturer of solar panels. They're becoming more commodities. So I think that Mexico can engage in an industrial policy where we produce our own solar panels, and that can solve a number of issues. Yeah, so that's one. I mean, the other is that the energy sector is becoming more digitalized. Yeah, so how and digitalization can change the way that we understand the business of energy. And part of it is that, and going back to the question on the U.S. Mexico relationship, is that energy, the value from energy not only comes from the kilowatt hours, from the barrels of oil, but from certainty. Yeah, the certainty and the reliability that I have from knowing that if I turn on the lights, there will be light, or there will be gasoline, or there will be, that's a value that we can have, no? And digitalization can change a little bit of that. And in terms of electricity, for example, the real resource constraint doesn't have to do anything with resources, with natural resources, but with transmission. Yeah? How do we rebuild our transmission network in order to accelerate the energy transition and adopt new technologies? And
So I
that's
have-
something that we can do.
So I have a question, a follow-up question. Is as I listen to you, it's comforting to know that energy is today not dependent on hydrocarbons, that there are many other sources of energy, capital intensive, the technology and digitalization can take us to a different stage. So the question for me is, and that it's possible for Mexico to have the energy that it requires to continue building its manufacturing in the future and to continue to integrate in the international markets. So the question then becomes, are the policies the right policies to accomplish what you just suggested could be done in terms of energy to better position Mexico on the international stage? Is there a coincidence, a match between what you're saying, where technology may be going, and where Mexico's policy is right now?
On the periphery, I mean, we have a paper published here at the Baker Institute. The core part of the Claudia Sheinbaum's energy reform is to reform the market. No, where CFE, the public utility, has 54% of the market share, regardless. Yeah, that's very problematic. That doesn't pass Economics 101 market design. I mean, because you can't have two supply curves. That's basically it. On the other hand, but I think that's a legacy that's coming from the previous government. Yeah, that's the reform that the previous president wanted to have. That was the core. However, I see that this government is more willing to promote new technologies. Yeah, but that's on the periphery, as I'm saying. The promotion, for example, of solar panels paired with air conditioners in Sonora and in other hot states, I think it's an advancement because it shows an understanding of the new way that we can produce electricity, for example. Yeah, but it's a small part of it. The core part of it, the main one that can really change things, is exactly the same as it was like the previous government wanted.
So some concerns there on the energy sector if Mexico is to continue industrializing and being competitive in manufacturing. I want to now talk to Arturo up here from Aptiv on infrastructure. Part of this project on nearshoring was to examine the various policies that Mexico is pursuing to be competitive in manufacturing and certainly be an object of nearshoring. And that's, I guess, where my questions on energy. Are we ready? Is Mexico ready? I think Arturo is a lot more engaged. He's online, as you can see, on infrastructure. And this morning we heard about infrastructure very briefly from Jacob, making a kind of a comparison between Mexico and Indian infrastructure. When I travel to Mexico, Arturo, I see Mexico stalling on infrastructure. Can you give us an idea of where Mexico is today, its infrastructure investment, rebuilding, maintenance, so that with an eye to nearshoring and manufacturing, Mexico can, I guess, turbo forward. Where are we on that score when it comes to Mexico's ability to truly attract new greenfield investment in the future?
Yeah, thanks, Tony, for the invitation, and please accept my apology for not being able to be there. Let me answer the question in different parts. The first is how much infrastructure are we investing today? We are close to 2% of GDP. If you saw reports from the OECD or the consulting firms, you need to invest basically 8% of GDP to build infrastructure that you need for a rapid growing economy, which should be the case of Mexico. So we are far behind. The main reason that you hear about why we invest so little in infrastructure, it's in general people said we don't have enough funds, which I think it's incorrect because we have since the reform of the 1990s, we have the pension funds. So we have financial autarky, for putting a term. That is, we have in Mexico the funds to build infrastructure that we need. We don't need funds from the outside. Not that it's not good to have it, but we don't need it. Why are we we have this lag that you saw when you travel through Mexico, through its roads to the airports around the country? Let me give you 5 challenges that we discussed during the workshop that we had in Monterrey, and let me give you the 5 the main concerns and the main challenges that we face in infrastructure. I think first is planning, lack of planning. Every 6 years at the national level, at the state level, or even every 3 years at the municipality level, we are rebuilding everything. We like, or politicians like to rebuild the whole state or the whole country every time there is a change in administration. So we don't have long-term planning, which is something that you need for infrastructure, because infrastructure projects are something that will last for 20, 50 years. The second challenge, and it's violence and insecurity. It's definitely a big concern. It's a big concern for nearshoring, the roads, violence and insecurity for the value chains in Mexico are a challenge, and we need, infrastructure is suffering also from that. The third challenge, which is really, really important, is the change that the last administration and the current administration has regarding private sector participation. There is a complete misunderstanding, in my view, of what the private sector can do for infrastructure, and it also has a new phase, because many of the infrastructure projects are not built by the private sector, but by the military, which I think it will, or it has also increased the problems with transparency and corruption, which is the fourth point that I was about to say, that we have in Mexico. And finally, I think the other problem that we have is that, as you said, we are lacking in investing in maintenance and also last mile infrastructure, which sometimes is really small part of the whole project that is needed to convert or to improve or update. And politicians like new white elephants. And so if you put together all the things that I just said, you can see that, we don't have enough public funds, that's correct, but we do have private funds, but what we don't have is enough conditions to build infrastructure, because the actors are lacking coordination. I will resume in that sense.
It seems to me that on energy and on infrastructure, what I hear thus far is that Mexico's wounds are largely self-inflicted. Private-public partnerships could work very well on both, and yet it is an ideological block, especially in this government, or the previous government, in this government, that don't seem to be unwilling to unleash the power of the market, even if it is in public-private partnerships, to boost the infrastructure and the energy that Mexico is going to need. It's not that it cannot do it. It seems to me that the rails that Mexico has imposed on itself are really of its own making. And that happens also, I think, with human capital. We also have a paper that should be coming out shortly, I think, on that was authored by Marco and his fellow academics, a few of his co-authors, on Mexico's investment in human capital. We know that in a modern economy, the knowledge economy, it's all about brains, it's all about skills, it's all about upskilling and reskilling and being supple, flexible, plastic in transformation of people more than anything else. But we also see Mexico engaged in policies that are not quite there yet, and again, largely by governmental decision. Marco, where is Mexico with all this potential? How is Mexico looking at Mexicans as a real national asset, perhaps the most important national asset when it comes to investment in education? And then let me throw another variable in there that I would like you to speak to, investment in science and technology, because that's also another important component. If there's one thing that makes an economy grow, it's investment in its people, in infrastructure, in science and technology. Where is Mexico there?
Well, first of all, let me just thank you for the invitation to the Baker Institute. I am Marco Fernandez. I lead the education initiative that is the Center for Education Policy at Tec de Monterrey and the education program at Mexico Evalúa, one of the leading think tanks in Mexico. And let me get back to what Jacob was sharing with us. I mean, maybe I tend to go to the negative side, but when I see what is going on in terms of the education policies and the human capital formation in my country, it is very hard to be optimistic, because in order to achieve the goals and these expectations of really be beneficiary of what's going on with these reallocations of the global commodity chains, one of the key aspects is human capital. And if we have learned from the mistakes of the past, from NAFTA in the first version, is that we cannot bet on just on the cheap labor cost side, because then we're just going to be a temporary assembly partner and not really boosting development and equity perspective that the country has. And for doing that, education is key. But here is where unavoidably you cannot really be optimistic, because for building the more complex skills that the world requires in this competitive market, you need to have the basic covers. And when you see that 64% of kids in Mexico do not understand what they read, that 70% of them have basic problems with math, tell me, how are we going to build critical thinking? Tell me, how are we going to develop problem-solving skills? I mean, the human resources of the main business in Mexico, 64% of them are telling us that the just vacancies that they have cannot be filled in because people are not having the skills required to develop these new tasks. And yes, the government has been announcing a series of statistics and plans, and they can be shining, but you begin to dig, and there are important holes on those announcements. Let's, for example, every year, 400,000 kids are graduating from technical careers. You would say, oh, that's awesome. That's like a strength of the Mexican labor force. Well, but basically 70% of them are not working in the field or in a job related to the field where they studied. And why is that the case? Because they haven't developed the skills of the Industry 4.0, precisely related to this nearshoring phenomenon. And why are they not developing those skills? We have a deep problem in the training of teachers and professors. I mean, the budget was approved last December. We have this conversation, very candid conversation. I recognize that at least we're having those conversations with the federal authorities and with many state authorities. The budget that was approved by Congress last December, it's $7 per teacher for this 2025 for improving their training. Tell me, how are we going to develop these complex skills that are required? I mean, you want to talk about energy? I mean, in order to be benefiting from that technology, we need the people that are trained for that. But with the quality of teachers that we have, it's really hard to be optimistic. And that's why it's important, these kind of partnerships between the academia and the private sector. Because we can keep lamenting what is going on, or we need to be driving policies to try to push and work with governments in order to cope with many of these challenges. I know that in the QA, we can go through these policies. But right now, I mean, the scenario is very complicated, even more because in the demographic side, we're going down. We're having less young people. And the young people that we're having are not well trained. They do not know basically English, for example. That is something that is right now essential. But in the core of the curriculum reform that has been pushed since last administration and is being continued by this government, they said, no, but we have to recover the essence and the richness of the Mayan cultures or the Nahuatl language, etc. And it's not to be disrespectful to these ancient cultures. But do we really need to teach a Mayan in the schools? Or we have an urgent need to develop, for example, English, the basic English, so we can integrate successfully. Last point, because sometimes the statistics are really not capturing the essence of the problem. If you talk, for example, with the people in the automotive industry, we do a lot of field work. And one person was telling me, Professor, we need to go to the basics, for example, of math, where we are trying to retrain people that are applying for the jobs. Because the machines are imported machines, and obviously, they are in the English system. But our kids cannot make the conversion with the centimeters that are acquired in these machines. So they cannot differentiate, for example, between a 0.5 centimeters or 0.05 centimeters diameter of the cables that are used for the automotive industry. So, I mean, when I see all this optimism, etc., I wish I could join forces. But I can see that there are a lot of challenges that we really need to speed up working on, or this opportunity is going to become a tragedy for my country.
I think some of the workshops that we held in this particular project on public safety and security, which was also mentioned this morning, and education or human capital and infrastructure and energy and the many different things that Mexico needs to work on, I want to make sure that even though the tone is or appears to be very negative, the reality is that I think they're largely self-imposed. And the solutions are often staring at Mexico in the face. Yeah. Open the markets, open private-public partnerships, implement the right policies, and let the markets and people do what they do best, make smart decisions instead of constrain the decisions. But that goes through Congress and congressional work to pass the right legislation, which then becomes, regulation. What's going on in Congress? I think Representative Granados, what is happening there? What do you see in Congress? What is the priorities of Congress? Do you see that Congress is thinking about these big challenges and trying to resolve these challenges? Tell us a little bit about the dynamics. I visited the Mexican Congress. We met there last time. I was in the Mexican House of Representatives, and we had an interesting conversation. I've been to the Senate, and it's, once you go through security and you go on the grounds of the Mexican Congress and you see all these Congress members and senators walking around, thinking, talking, is Congress in the right mood? Is the country in the right mood? Is Congress doing the right by the by the Mexican people? Are the parties governing thinking about these problems? Are they dialoguing and conversing on these issues and trying to figure out how to get the right policies in place?
Thank you, Tony. So many questions. And some of them I haven't too, you know. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for the this amazing for sharing these amazing comments with amazing people, of course. I studied international relations, and now I'm even more confused than ever. I found a job, but you know, I'm in politics now. I've been in the federal government, I've been in the state government, I've been in the municipal administration, and now from the legislative is a completely different story. And then after listening to Jacob, I'm even more confused, I think. I wanted to change all my notes, but thank you anyway for the invitation. And I want to be positive. I am an optimistic person in general. I can say that now from Congress, I represent Chihuahua, the state of Chihuahua, and I represent the National Action Party, is the PAN. The majority is now with Morena. And just so you have an idea, and I think you had a slide, Jacob, of the Congress, of the how is the Congress, the composition of the Congress, thank you. We are 71 congressmen and women in La Cámara de Diputados. We are 71 from the PAN, and there's 500 congressmen and women in total. So we have no chance. There's no way that we can have something approved in the party I represent. However, I am optimistic because I think we have to come together once in a lifetime. So one story is when you go to the main room, this very impressive room where you discuss and you debate all these reforms. But a different thing is when you go to the commissions and you talk in short with the other parties and you really say, well, of course, we're from the same state, we're suffering from the same, but it's very frustrating. By the way, I didn't vote for that budget. But it's very frustrating when you go there and you see everything is, you know, the answer is no to whatever you propose in the Congress. Talking about the energy reform, and I know I'm not the expert, but I have to disagree with you. I don't see where is the money going to come from to invest in infrastructure, in transmission lines, being from Chihuahua and being one of the 3 states that more attracts foreign direct investment, that is, I will say, booming. Chihuahua, we are the first employers in the country. And I'm interested in Matamoros, in that region too, because you understand this dynamic, the region, the power of the region. So I don't see where is the money going to come from for energy, for CFE. That I see everything is centralizing again, as if we are looking at the 1970s, 80s, when I was born, everything was centralized. I'm seeing this coming back to Mexico, and that worries me. In education, of course, we don't want to learn. Now the books for primary education, now the books are teaching kids why the fraud in 2000, when was the first election? 2006? When the fraud, when Andres Manuel said that there was fraud in the election. That's what they are teaching kids now, instead of teaching what they need to know. So it's kind of frustrating, but I think that Congress has a fundamental task. That's where the decisions are made for the country, for the good of every individual and family. And we have to think more of Mexico as a region. Of course, we have to, of North America, I'm sorry, and we have to allow private investment if we want to evolve, if we want to develop in the country. There's a judiciary reform that is catastrophic for the country, that puts on the spot for uncertainty, for lack of rule of law. So I don't understand how foreign investment is going to keep coming if we keep on this track. So I'm optimistic too. I don't know.
Let me ask you a follow-up question on that, because when I said that I often, when I visit Mexico City and I happen to visit Congress members, senators, and you walk through and into the gardens of the compound, and you begin to see these Congress members. Walk us through the micro scene that happens in the conversations. Is there any possibility? I mean, who initiates legislation? Is it all coming down from the executive office, meaning Sheinbaum's office, and then everybody votes that way, and you're in the very small minority? So clearly they got the numbers to do just about anything they want. Or are there initiatives that come from within Congress that prosper? And then walk us also through the debates. Do you have actual conversations with Morena party members on amendments, changes, improvements? Is there dissent among them? Are there conversations in private where you might see that they're, even if they vote solidly and nobody really dissents, is there the room for conversation? Is there a little bit of a dialogue going on? Walk us through the small dynamics of the Mexican Congress today, because I think that many of the improvements to laws, to legislation, is made sometimes in the hallways when Congress members talk to each other and they kind of compromise. Walk us through what's it like when you engage in conversation on public policy.
The initiatives come from the executive, or it can come from the Chamber of Deputies or the senators. Most of them have come from the executive, from President Claudia Sheinbaum. And there is a line, of course, there is a very straight line where Morena has to vote in the same way as she directs. There is some discussion before that within every parliamentary group. We have the 71 congressmen and congresswomen from PAN. We have a conversation and we go through the initiatives and we talk about it to see how are we going to vote. But again, we don't have the numbers. The sad thing is, and a very sad thing, and I feel bad to say this, is that there is no debate. Even if we have our reserves on each and every article of that law or regulation or whatever is going to be discussed, you look at the room and there's nobody listening to you. The more than 250 congressmen and women from Morena, they are not there. Empty seats, that's what you see. That's what you see when you go there. I was very nervous the first time I was going to go to speak in the main, space where you give your words. And I was very nervous. And when I stepped up there, I said, what am I nervous about? There's nobody here, only my party. And it's sad. It sounds like a joke, but it's very sad because you're taking the most important decisions for the lives of the Mexicans. So there is a slight chance. Actually, last week there was an initiative coming from PAN about kids and tourism. So the kids had to be, when they accompanied by an adult, the adult has to prove that there is a relationship, because there is a lot of traffic with kids in tourism. And that was unanimously approved by Congress. And we were amazed. But that's the only initiative that I have seen in 6-7 months of our time there, that it has been approved. Otherwise, everything is no. But there is a chance, to your question, Tony, there is a chance to discuss things. As I said, within the commissions, I am a part of the Economic Commission, of the North Border Commission, and Foreign Relations Commission, and we talk about these issues.
There are some cards there. If you just raise your hand and somebody will pick it up. Let me go back to Arturo, because I think this is something that a little bit more on the macro level. Arturo, one of the things that, we've talked about some of the infrastructure projects of the previous administration and how they've turned into kind of white elephants. We're talking about the Dos Bocas refinery out there with $20 billion spent on it and still not really producing just about nothing going on there. We talked about the Mayan train, which has sometimes 2 or 4 passengers, but not really working, and a number of projects like that. The airport outside Mexico City, after the big airport was canceled, with very few passengers really in flights. So tens of billions of dollars really wasted on projects that are not paying off, and almost any economist would have told you that, or any business person would have told you that it was a difficult bet to make. But there is one project that I've always seen some promise in, and that is the Trans-Isthmus corridor between Salina Cruz, Oaxaca, and I think Coatzacoalcos, Veracruz. To sort of compete with the Panama Canal. It's a little bit different because it's about 250 kilometers, about 180, 170 miles. So ships would have to come in and then unload and then load up and train, reload on the other side. There are some estimates that I've read that it might compete with the Panama Canal, or about maybe take 10 to 15% of the Panama Canal trade and still make it profitable. Do you think that this is a viable project? Where is this project that seems at least a bit promising over many others that Mexico has apparently wasted quite a bit of money on? What do you think about this project?
Yeah, thanks, Tony. I think this is probably the only project of the last administration that complies with a cost-benefit analysis, 101, no? So I think it's a good project. It's a good project because it depends on the scope. But if you think of the project not just like sending something from one place to the other, which is trying to compete vis-a-vis the Panama Canal, but if you think of the project as a value chain, trying to change what is Mexico is receiving on Salina Cruz, and getting something different with added value at Veracruz and send that different product through Veracruz, is a really, really good project. What are the main challenges that are still facing this project? Is still facing? The first is anchor firms or anchor firms. You need that because if you don't, again, it's the same thing. If you don't collaborate on, and coordinate with the private sector, and you try to impose what is going to be produced in these value chains, that is not going to work. You need to consider what the firms that are going to put money in there are trying to produce, and that's something that is still, it's a challenge. The other thing is social problems with the community, so community problems. Oaxaca is known to be a state, and the communities are very. You need to work a lot with them to try to do infrastructure projects there, and it's still a problem. And the other is sustainability and environment. I think trying this is a very good project, and it's related to the type of things that you need to the challenges that you need to circumvent to produce the infrastructure that we need. So I think it's a very good example of what needs to be done. But it's a great project, Tony.
Thank you. Marco, did you have a remark on that?
Just to follow up, because we're working precisely right now with Oaxaca and Veracruz, trying to help them in line of this expectation for the project, how to help them narrow the gap between what kids are learning and what is going to be required through this project. And it's important to mention it because despite many of the challenges that I underscored in my intervention, there is this space for optimism in the sense that state governments are trying to cope with these kind of challenges. So, for example, in the case of Oaxaca, they are very aware of many of, obviously, the poverty issue, the huge problem of education, etc. And in the case of Oaxaca, I mean, it's not that they're going to impose, Arturo, to the private sector. It's because there is no private sector. The private sector is very weak. So, I mean, precisely they're trying to find ways to develop the skills that are going to be required to become a little bit attractive in line of the expectations of the investment that the ISMO project is taking place. And you see other states, Nuevo León, Guanajuato, that are understanding that need to tune up the coordination between the private sector and the education sector to come up with better facilities, laboratories, for example, or training places for the kids that are in school, or for reskilling the people that are already in the factories. The need of finding ways with their technicians so they can go to the school or bring the kids to the company to get this additional training, the expectation of this so-called dual system to improve the training of students. So, of course, I mean, despite many, sincerely, not so good decisions on education at the federal level, at the state one, with the different colors, not only with the panistas or with the people from Movimiento Ciudadano in Jalisco, but even in some governments of Morena at the state level, we're trying we're seeing this openness to say, okay, if we really do not take on this challenge of human capital formation, we're going to be screwed. So in that sense, I mean, yes, there is this big, not optimistic overview at the federal level, but at the same time, I'm seeing some spaces where state authorities are trying to cope with the challenges that they are facing.
It's quite revealing that you say even somewhere in the states are doing this. Because clearly, I'm aware that in Chihuahua, for example, in the state of Chihuahua, the state created its own Council for Science and Technology because as the federal government ramped down its investment in science and technology, some states are stepping up and saying, I guess we have to do it. Same thing on healthcare, on education, on science and technology. So the states are filling in voids that the federal government is abandoning, I think, to a large extent. I want to ask you a question, Rolando. The question that came from the public, and I think it's a really important one, and then perhaps, Manke, if I may ask you the same question. Fiscally, Mexico is getting a tight spot. The Morena governments inherited a public debt that was well below 50% GDP. The ratio was closer to 40%, but it's now closer to 60%. So the federal debt is growing. The tax base is stalled. It's really not growing because the economy is not growing. Collection was very strong, but most of the taxes have been collected that were in arrears have been collected. The fiscal position of the Mexican government to invest in infrastructure, in education, in healthcare, in energy, and all the promises that it's making is increasingly limited on the horizon. What do you see there, Rolando?
Well, I think it's spot on. I think Mexico collects bad and spends more badly. Yeah. So I mean, and you were saying this, Tony. Some of these problems are self-inflicted. Mexico has not collected taxes in years. No, some of it was probably due to the oil receipts that were coming from Pemex and Cantarella, so didn't have the need to have this. No, but I mean, a fiscal reform has been discussed for years and years and years, probably more than the energy reform. Yeah, and I think this is very important. No, I mean, we've seen that we spend badly on infrastructure projects, the Maya train, the refinery, for example, the cancellation of the airport, and what I'm trying to connect the dots now is that infrastructure is probably the common theme in this panel, and also related to the Jacob's opening remarks. In this world that is full of turmoil and geopolitical risks, and where uncertainty is becoming structural, I mean, when you have uncertainty, what do? You buy insurances, right? I mean, you overpay. You have you pay for overcapacity. You pay for an insurance just in case something happens, right? So and you also say that we have to weather the storm. So what should we do now, Mexico, to weather the storm so that when this wave passes, and I think it's investing in infrastructure, and I think it's probably investing in transmission lines, yeah, because that will be there. And when things resume to normality, hopefully, the country that has built infrastructure, perhaps transmission in these years, will probably be have an advantage because it will be there. It takes years to build infrastructure, so why not start now? And that has to do also with the Congress. It has to do with electricity. It has to do with a geopolitical risk that we have. So I think if I'm taking my main takeaway now from for me is infrastructure is the key word. Infrastructure, infrastructure, infrastructure. Also, I think in the opening remarks they were saying that we business people, in times of uncertainty, we go back to academia. But we academia also have to go back to businesses. And yesterday we're discussing over dinner, and there are some things that won't change in the U.S. Mexico relationship. One is geography. One is a large border. One is that many Mexicans live in the U.S. So thinking, say after 4, 8, 10 years of different governments, those will remain. Those won't change. So we'll have to be ready, and I think that we have to make the decision now for when this storm finishes.
Let me add a question, Manke, as you address the fiscal situation in Mexico, which I see quite complicated, increasingly complicated, I think. and the Mexican government has refused to raise taxes. In Mexico, they usually call that a fiscal reform. It just means a tax hike. I think that's what they generally mean in Mexico. The taxes are going up. So let me add one more question to you, because you're in Congress and you see what's happening. I think Trump yesterday, a couple of days ago, something like that, the last 24 to 48 hours, said that maybe the USMCA is not really necessary anymore. He told that to Carney, I think, when he was visiting. I believe that it will be there, and I believe it'll be renegotiated. I think he understands that it's key for U.S. interests. What will be in it, who knows? But I think Sheinbaum is counting on a renegotiation. The problem that I see there is that she wants the USMCA to remain, to stay. It's some kind of guarantee. It puts Mexico in a good position to have an agreement with the United States, given the international circumstances. But she also seems to me to want to eat her cake and have it too. A re-centralized economy, monopolistic or oligopolistic sectors, while at the same time enjoying the fruits of open trade. And so there's a tension in there in Mexico. What do you see? So comment to the fiscal situation and then to that, and let's do that very briefly, because I think we're probably, Rodrigo, we got just a couple of more minutes to close up our conversation. We could go on forever, but I think we just wanted to give you an idea of the challenges that Mexico needs to do to make nearshoring a reality. So the fiscal situation and then the USMCA renegotiations as you see it from Mexico City.
Okay, I'm going to try to be quick and clear. So you won't grow because of a decree. And that's how the President Sheinbaum is looking at. The federal government says Mexico is going to grow more than 2%. And that's impossible, no? Or 3%, that's impossible. You can't say just because you're the president, we're gonna grow 3%. I'm going to talk about the example of Chihuahua, of the state of Chihuahua. Chihuahua has been able to survive this tsunami, if I may use this word, because of the fiscal policies that the state and the municipal government has. Chihuahua, the city of Chihuahua has been very efficient in recollecting the property tax. And that's why it has been able to survive. Chihuahua collects has own resources 70% versus 30% depending on the federal budget. So that's a good thing for the city. And it happens more or less the same for the state of Chihuahua. The state of Chihuahua collects on salary tax, most of it. And that's why it has been able to invest in highways, even if the highways is the function or the responsibility of the federal government. It's actually a crime if you do it, if the state invests in highways without the permission of the federation, and that's very confusing. But anyways, we have a very natural and very good relationship between the private sector, the academy, and the government in Chihuahua. And the example is FECHAC. It's a foundation that when something goes wrong in the state or the cities, like a natural disaster, then the private companies impose an increment in the percentage of the salary tax. So we received a state with a debt, the major debt in the country, the most important debt in the country. And so the private sector came in and said, well, we are going to pay 2% more on salary tax. But that's how Chihuahua works. What I'm trying to say is that there is no way that we can move forward if it's not with the companies, with the business, the private sector, the academy, and the government. And the other question was about the USMCA. So I think it's fundamental that we have to revise and we have to sign. There is no opportunity of growing if we don't do it as a region. So again, I am the kind of person who thinks that everything comes back to local and region, and then national, no? So I guess the president has to work to beat the challenges that we have internally in the country, so we can be competitive and we can be able to sit at the table and sign again the USMCA.
Let me tell you, to conclude, the Center for the U.S. and Mexico here at the Baker Institute is now, I think, the premier think tank in the United States to think Mexico in the U.S. Mexico relationship. There were other think tanks, but at least one good partner of us at the Woodrow Wilson Center has now shuttered. So we certainly hope to step up in the conversation. And we want to be optimistic. We want to make sure that we point out what the challenges are, but not to put the prospects down, but rather to say, this needs to be addressed, this needs to be taken care of, this needs to be fixed, because that's the job of us as think tanks, to examine, diagnose, analyze the problems, and then propose solutions. So often the conversation turns somewhat pessimistic, but we don't see challenges as defeat. We see them as opportunities to be proactive and to come up with ideas. I want to thank the panel because I think they did an excellent job at pointing out some of those challenges. The next panel, I think, will address the future, and I think we'll hear some of the solutions that lessons learned and solutions that might help both Mexico and the United States and the North American region to address some of these challenges. So I thank you, Rolando, Manke, Marco, Arturo. Thank you for joining us in this panel. Let me help our panel. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, let's please take your seats. We're going to start the second panel. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Please take your seats. We're about to begin the next panel. Thank you.
Hello. If you could all kindly take your seats, please.
There you go.
Thank you, Tony.
Yep.
Thank you very much. Tony, thank you again for a magnificent first panel on this terrific opportunity to engage serious and constructive conversation on the current state of affairs in North America with trade, tariff wars, and the current situation. And now our panel, I'm delighted to join this conversation as an active moderator, and I thank the Mexico Center at the Baker Institute. I agree with Tony that it has become the premier voice on issues concerning Mexico and North America in the region. My name is Roberto Salinas. I've done a couple of things with the Mexico Center of the Baker Institute before, and delighted to join back. So now this panel is going to talk not about the current state of affairs, but in light of what we heard in the last panel and Jacob's fantastic presentation, we're now going to talk about the future. And my first inclination was to ask ChatGPT if Matamoros will look this way 15 years from now, what will North America look in 15 years? But that's part of where I want to go, because I do agree with Tony that there may be good times and there may be sunny, beautiful days like today here in Houston, and there will be hurricanes, and there will be good times and bad times, but we have to look forward into the future and not devote ourselves on whether Donald Trump wakes up one day and slaps 100% tariff on whatever the favorite good of the day is, whether it's movies or tomatoes or whatnot, or we can't be complaining constantly about what's going to happen and have a negative outlook on Claudia Sheinbaum. Now with the new government in Canada, we'll hear from Meredith on this front. I think we have to look into the future and for future generations, and things that will also benefit us in this current generation. So we have an absolutely outstanding panel. We're going to follow the same methodology. Remind you that we do have the question and answer. This is before lunch, so I imagine that Rodrigo will let me know when it's lunchtime and everybody is hungry. But let's get started, and I'd like first to ask Roberto Duran, who is a non-resident scholar here at the U.S. For the U.S. and Mexico here at the Baker Institute, has a very important position paper on geopolitics and economics. So Roberto, we heard about the current state of affairs. Of course, tariffs, trade talks. There's apparently a new trade agreement between the UK and the United States. Oh, and there's also white smoke. We still don't know. I'm pretty sure that the peso appreciated against the dollar because of the white smoke today. But and so how do you look at the future? We've heard a lot of negative input, and perhaps our minds are trained to, as Jacob was saying, to look at negativity. I think we have to be cautiously optimistic. After the hurricane, we will innovate, we will compete, and come strong again. But given the remarkable integration and the remarkable expansion of commerce and investment in North America in the last 30 years of North American trade integration, how do you see the next generation, or what do you think are the necessary next steps?
Thank you very much, Roberto, and thank you very much, the Baker Institute, for this invitation. And I would like to start with an anecdote. I am an economist by training. I did my PhD at Oxford University. I read economic geography. And I was resident at the School of Geography of Oxford. And the School of Geography actually was the birthplace of geopolitics. That now it's everybody's talking about geopolitics. And something that it's very interesting about this geopolitical approach that we listen in the morning opposite to economics is that we focus in the hard constraints, in the really structural forces that can drive economic development. And despite all the noise that we are reading, we can focus with this kind of analysis on long terms. And I totally agree with this morning lecture. I think that North America has a brilliant future. North America, like the continent, it's blessed by a privileged geography, like resources. We have an enormous territory that is unexplored. We are protected, as President Trump said, by two beautiful oceans, and we do not have to be worried about the next invasion, where it's gone opposite to Europe, to things that happen in the other side of the world. So I think that in the long term, like this North American bloc will have all the opportunities to compete and to be relevant in the world. And this North American bloc, it's fully integrated by the U.S., Canada, Mexico, and I'm sure that Central America will have a role on this. When this future will happen, and I think that that's my economist part that comes, like, well, in the long term, everybody will be dead. And how are we getting to that long term is the key question. And I think that that's something that we have to ask. And given the recent events that we have seen, I wrote this position paper that you can read in the Baker webpage, and I suggest that there are like 5 basic forces that we have to pay attention to have an understanding of the direction of all these events that are unfolding in front of our eyes. Maybe the first one is like try to understand and to learn that this is not all about economics. It has to do with geopolitics. It has to do with security. And in this moment, for good or for bad, we have all this conversation happening at the same place. This is not exactly new, but the way it's happening, it's new. After we signed the NAFTA, these conversations between economic agenda, political agenda, immigration were separate. I used to be part of the government of President Peña Nieto in the Ministry of Finance. I never had a conversation about security. So that was an incredible privilege for this asymmetric relation between Mexico and U.S. to have these separate channels. This is not happening anymore. Everything is on the table. And yes, I would say, and we are seeing that there are geopolitical objectives that are being more important than the economic agenda. And specifically for Mexico, we know that it's security, we know that it's immigration, and it will be more important the role of China within the North American supply chains. And I would say that the good news is that I think that the two countries are aligned in the main objectives. I think that nobody in Mexico, reasonable in Mexico, would say that it's in the best interest of the country to have the drug lords ruling the northern border, or not having control of what is happening in the border, or having like a good flow, a normalized and ordered flow of immigrants. So I would say that Mexico and U.S. in the core aspects of security and immigration will be aligned, and I think that it's very positive, opposite what might be happening in Europe. So as we are seeing in front of our eyes, like Mexican and U.S. government are getting agreements on these difficult topics. So sooner or later, we will be ready to go and start discussing the serious topics about the economic agenda, but this will be mixed. I think that this is going to happen. The second force, I would say that we will be following a very pragmatic agenda in the U.S. and Mexico. And this pragmatism is because of the restriction and the limits that the countries are facing. I truly believe that, and I share the opinion of the morning's lecture, that in North America we do not have other option more than having like a strong economic cooperation and being integrated. So these pragmatisms eventually will emerge as long as we have agree and we fulfill the security issues that we have in the agenda. I think that there is another thing that we haven't discussed more, and I would love to listen to my colleague Mary from Canada, and it's that geography could shape the debate and the negotiation process in North America. As I said, like security has been an important component of our conversations. Mexico and Canada, the security challenge is very clear. It has to do with organized crime, with drug lords. With Canada, it's more complex. It has to do, for example, with Arctic security. If we see a map of the military bases of Russia in the last 20 years, well, actually, the Russians have been fortified their Arctic. The Arctic is melting now. You can navigate in the summer, and eventually you can navigate all the year. And actually, the defenses in the Canadian Arctic and Greenland are not at that same level. So the defense and the security aspects of the U.S. and Canada are more difficult, more complex, and are in another level in comparison to the challenges that the U.S. has with Mexico. And if really we are going into a war in which economics objectives and negotiation will be subject to defense, then the U.S. will have a very different conversation with Canada and with Mexico. And I don't know how does it looks in a comprehensive UMCA 2.0 negotiation. So that's a big question. How is this going to take place? I think that a fourth force, it has to do with all the things that we learned in the morning about this geopolitical challenge of the U.S. in Europe, in Asia. So those are serious challenges, serious problems. And I'm not saying that in North America we do not have serious problems, but I would say that it's in the best interest for North America to settle their problems soon, and sooner than later, opposite to what is happening in Europe. Yep, sorry.
Thank you, Roberto. Precisely on that issue, I'd like to turn to David Gans, who, of course, has been a prominent voice in global economics and international trade, and holds a distinguished fellowship here at the Baker Institute as well. And David, I'd like for you to share with us, first of all, your take on the current tariff situation, what happened after Liberation Day, which some of us would have renamed Obliteration Day, but that's my personal opinion. And if there's any type of logic, some have said, up to the Mar-a-Lago Accord, will we come out the better after this great reset or this great disrupt? Because in truth, I mean, Roberto's right, Jacob is right. Canada, Mexico, and the United States need each other in North America the supply chain, sometimes people don't realize how incredibly tightly integrated they are, ranging from Alaska all the way to Tuxtla Gutierrez. And you can't undo these 30 years of integration just overnight. What would be your take on it, and how do you see the future?
Let me start with the second part, and that is there method to this madness? And I'm skeptical that there is. I think part of the problem is Mr. Trump and his colleagues have expressed conflicting desires. They want to move more manufacturing, including auto manufacturing, from other places like Mexico and Canada to the U.S. They want to increase government revenues. I mean, tariffs are taxes, federal taxes, just like the ones many of us paid on April 15th, at least in terms of the impact. But if they have high tariffs, that means there'll be fewer imports, and therefore they won't get a lot of government revenue. I think in some cases there's broad bipartisan support for trying to rein in China. Whether we can do that or not, I don't know, but certainly the Biden administration shared many of Mr. Trump's objectives. And in some cases, I think he just wants to punish people he doesn't like. But the problem is, if you put all those together, the issues conflict with each other even before you look at what the impact on the American economy in terms of a recession or a flight of government capital, just because people don't have confidence in the dollar anymore. So I don't think there's any easy answer to this. I know there are a lot of people who have faith in Mr. Trump, who voted for him, who think there is method, but I don't think we've seen it yet. And maybe it will show up, but I'm guessing it won't. In terms of the tariffs, I think, and I'll try to be as brief as I can, we have to look at the worldwide situation because it has direct impact on Mexico and Canada. I would assert that what looks like a base 10% tariff, which has been imposed on, 180 countries, some of them with higher levels possible, is not going away, not in the near future, not in the longer future. I don't think there's democratic opposition to a 10% tariff, although there is when it comes to Canada, Mexico, and a few of our allies. These reciprocal tariffs, some of which go up as high as 50%, may be reduced with negotiations between now and July 8, and maybe they won't. And what happens with other countries has a direct impact, not just on the auto industry, but on a lot of other things like steel and steel, for example, that's exported from Mexico and Canada to the U.S. The first tentative agreement, and I think it's really tentative because I'm not sure it's going to happen, between the U.S. and the U.K. was announced a few hours ago. And one of the interesting things, I think, for Mexico and Canada is the 25% worldwide tariff on autos goes down to 10% under this UK agreement with a quota of 100,000, which probably covers everything. I don't think it matters because that's less than 5% of Mexican car exports to the U.S. But if you were to reduce tariffs on autos to 10% from Japan and Korea and the EU, and the U.S. tariffs on Mexican and Canadian cars remain at 25%, that would be, to put it mildly, a disaster. I don't think that'll happen, but it's a risk, and it's the one reason why we have to pay attention to what's going on elsewhere. At the moment, Mexico and Canada, hard to believe, have a significant comparative advantage over all other countries, because the 50 or 60% of Mexican exports, I don't know the exact number, to the U.S. That are USMCA compliant go in duty-free. Not steel, not aluminum, not cars or car parts. And Canada and Mexico are the only people in the world that still have zero tariff access to the U.S. Of course, that doesn't apply to the other 45 or 50%. What will happen in the 2026 review? We want to talk about the future. I don't think we really know. I mean, 5-6 weeks ago, Trump was talking about getting prepared for this review, and you can be fairly sure assuming it goes forward, that he will have a lot more demands that will be difficult for Mexico and Canada to match. But a couple of days ago, he said, when he was talking, I think, to Prime Minister Carney, well, USMCA was a transitional agreement. That's the term he used. And maybe it isn't necessary anymore. Needless to say, if that were to be the policy, and I suspect it will not be, it raises an interesting question, is what happens to the 50 or 60% of Mexican goods that are now going into the U.S. duty-free if by some chance there is no USMCA in the future. So I think the continued viability of the USMCA in the future is in question, but I agree with others on this panel and before that see it as absolutely essential, not only for Mexico and Canada, but for the U.S. because the level of integration over the last, 31 or 32 years means that notwithstanding the disastrous impact on Canada and Mexico's economy, it would be disastrous for the United States as well, which we could get into a lot more if anybody has any questions. Part of the problem, of course, is Mr. Trump is acting totally without any current congressional support, and the Supreme Court seems to be more friendly than they might be to his doing everything by executive actions, mostly under some older congressional legislation, 1962, 1977, in which the Congress delegated an enormous amount of authority in what is supposed to be its monopoly on interstate commerce and foreign commerce to the executive, and there is nobody in, in the Congress today who can successfully challenge that. The Republicans won't say a word. The Democrats complain a bit, but they don't have enough power to have much influence. I think things could change even in the next few months. If you have empty shelves at the supermarket, at Walmart, TJ Maxx, if inflation starts going up again, and perhaps most significantly, if there is a continued effort by foreigners, Japan, China, and others, to sell U.S. government obligations and put their money into Swiss francs and British pounds and EU euros, that could really get the attention of the administration. We saw him back off his reciprocal tariff assessments in a week because of that. So if it looks like the U.S. economy is going downhill, and if the financial markets are being attacked, I think there is, in the very near future, a possibility that some of this will either be retracted or postponed. For example, there's no way, in my view, you can negotiate trade agreements with, I think there are 19 countries that are in current negotiations between now and July 8th. So I will be surprised if that deadline doesn't get moved forward. There may be a few, let's face it, UK is pretty easy, even though the U.S. exports of agricultural products to the UK will be a firestorm in the UK. Japan, Korea are much more difficult. I think probably a minor agreement between the U.S. and China is possible fairly soon because everybody knows you can't sustain 40% tariffs, but you'll probably still end up with 45 or 50% tariffs. So I think the immediate future is probably more uncertainty of the same. And I think for Mexico and Canada, the most essential aspect, realistically, is to be sure that all goods that meet USMCA requirements, which is, keep in mind, it's not just the goods that have been exported in the past, it's those that have gone into the U.S. in the past that didn't need the certification from U.S. Rules of origin. When you add that to the 50% of Mexican exports that were going in under USMCA a few months ago, you're probably well over 60%, assuming everybody's doing the proper documentation. I mean, this is a very short-term overview of things, but I think the most important takeaway is the era of low U.S. tariffs is gone. The idea that our MFN tariffs, which average less than 3%, are going to come back, it seems to me, is very fanciful. I think 10% is probably the new base. And how that fits in with what Mexico and Canada have, both in some cases better treatment, in other cases worse treatment, is one of the huge uncertainties, which I certainly have no immediate answer for. Thank you.
Thank you, David. I'd like to turn to Meredith, who is joining us virtually from Ottawa, another distinguished voice in trade and global economics in Canada and in North America. Meredith, thank you for being with us today. I'd basically like to ask you the same question. Many people, when we talk about North America, see the relationship between Canada and the United States, which is going to top $800 billion in two-way trade this year. Between Mexico and the United States, it's also going to top the same number. We seem to be 1 and 2, and competing for who's the number one spot. But what comes after? I mean, these are not very encouraging overviews in terms of if we have a base of 10%. At this stage of the game, we should be talking about integrating human capital markets, integrating infrastructure markets, public-private partnerships, as we talked about in earlier sessions, and even the integration of capital markets, open skies, and all kinds of other really cool stuff. What is the view from Canada, especially in light of the new Carney government?
Thanks very much for the opportunity to be here. And I wish I was there in person. I've been watching online and following the discussion. So before I move to the future, I'll just catch us up on the brief overview of where things are in Canada. I think the conversations I've had with Americans in the last few months, Canada has never been more present in the United States than in the last few months, and I think that's regrettable, and it's largely because the relationship between Canada and the United States has taken a bit of a step backwards. It's been a really rocky relationship over, January to March, I would say. A difficult time. Criticisms by the president and his senior advisors have actually been taken quite personally by Canadians. So I think Jacob this morning, mentioned that there's been resurgence of Canadian nationalism. So, we've had this tariff threats, tariff realities, tariff climb downs. It's created a great deal of shock and awe. And Canada and Mexico have really been at the front end of that barrage that eventually became global. And when it did become global, we did see the pushback from Wall Street, which has moderated some of the president's ambition in this area. And I'm hoping that we can start to see some light at the end of the tunnel. But nevertheless, at this moment in time, we do have tariffs in place on steel and aluminum, 10% on energy. But as David mentioned, and I think earlier, USMCA compliant goods have been exempted from tariffs, which is positive. And so that means that actually most exports from Canada should qualify. But the challenge that firms have had in Canada, particularly small business, is that they've just very happily been exporting to the United States under MFN, most favored nation status, many of them. And so they haven't filled out the paperwork to qualify for tariff-free treatment. So our Trade Commissioner Service that usually spends its time helping firms enter other new markets than the United States right now is doing all this remedial work to help businesses in Canada make sure they can qualify for that tariff-free treatment. And on vehicles, there's also this kind of strange quote-unquote elegant solution that's been found that really is allowing right now U.S. headquartered vehicles that are made in Canada to be entering tariff-free for now. But I'm not sure that it's a long-term solution. I think it's a little bit of a stopgap as we head into USMCA negotiations around rules of origin. And so what this has all meant is that we've got a great deal of uncertainty in Canada. That uncertainty has virtually frozen all new investment into Canada across the board. Greenfield investment has just completely stopped across almost all sectors. And there are many in Canada who believe we're in a recession, even if the numbers don't quite reflect it. Our unemployment numbers are up. Higher prices at the grocery stores are being felt every day. We also have had two of the three big U.S. auto OEMs in Canada, GM and Stellantis, make announcements in the last week that they are reducing their production levels in Canada. Really, I think they're looking to align their production to Canadian demand in anticipation of potentially not being able to export to the United States in a competitive way in the future if tariff policy continues. So, this has all been a very rocky few months. I don't want to forget about Mexico as I kind of move forward to where we're at under the Carney government. We also saw from November to March a very kind of rocky period between Canada and Mexico, which has been totally unnecessary in my view, where we had both provincial and federal leaders taking preemptive and I think unnecessarily unfriendly action to attempt to isolate Mexico from USMCA. I think that was a strategic error and one that was never going to succeed. So I'll come back to that, but it means we also, Canada and Mexico, need to reset our own relations. So, earlier this week, 10 days ago, Mark Carney was elected in Canada. Really, it was a miracle. He saved the Liberal Party from certain defeat. And Mark Carney has been a central bank governor for two G7 countries, both for the United Kingdom as well as for Canada. He really was elected on standing up to Donald Trump and the threats about the 51st state. That has reinvigorated this sense of Canadian nationalism. He, I think at this point, has a very strong mandate to improve Canadian competitiveness, to focus completely on the economy, to advance trade diversification goals. So he met with President Trump just 2 days ago. Some of you have already mentioned President Trump made some what I think are quite concerning statements about the future of USMCA. They're not playing out that way in Canada, but I think that the audience here in this room probably has a more accurate take on the ambivalence that I heard from the president about the future of the deal. But I think Prime Minister Carney did an effective job of seeking to reset relations with the president. I'm cautiously optimistic that we're turning the page. I don't think that continuing kind of antipathy towards each other is effective. Gravity is real. The United States and Canada will continue to be neighbors. The United States is going to continue to be our largest trading partner. And it has always been the duty of the Canadian Prime Minister to develop a productive and constructive working relationship with the U.S. President, and I think that remains the case. I do think that Prime Minister Carney needs to seek to also reset relations with President Sheinbaum. I think she's done a very effective job, and that was mentioned earlier today, when it comes to handling President Trump, and I think that we could have learned a lot from her. If we had done more of the same, that probably would have benefited us. So where are we going in the near term? I think White House trade policy may be settling into something that's a little bit more manageable than we've seen in the past. I do believe in the institutions of Congress and other parts of the US government helping to kind of moderate some of the action that we've seen. I also think the private sector and Wall Street has played a big role. I anticipate that we'll see the president moving more towards managed trade. The UK deal that was announced this morning, I was reading through it in great interest. To me, it really just looks like very narrow sectoral managed trade in a couple of sectors. And speaking as one who has worked on the negotiations of a deal with Europe, it is always incredibly dangerous to announce a deal before the ink is dry. It actually weakens the position of the country most interested in announcing that. So we'll see where it goes and what it looks like in the end when the ink is actually dry. But I do think the United States is going to seek dominance in specific industries. So for the North American relationship, that means autos. So that's very threatening to Canada. I think we will see for Canada and Mexico a continuing interest as discussions advance either on USMCA or other parts of trade around focusing on competing with China. As David mentioned, there is bipartisan support for this in Washington. And I think it's deeper than the White House. I've been in Washington a couple of times over the last few months, and there is clearly a continuing interest in Canada and Mexico joining forces on this. I think the problem with that when it comes to things like Chinese content investment, national security issues, those kinds of things. But I think the problem with that for Canada right now is that I don't think it is politically feasible for Canada to join that project again, because we already did join that project under the Biden administration, unless we return to the status of ally and partner with the United States. It's just not feasible for us to align with the United States without any kind of certainty or gains for Canada in the way that we're being treated under, current violations of the USMCA and that kind of thing. So unless we see the president and the White House really moderate that position, I think that it will be difficult for us to make difficult choices when it comes to trading with other countries. And then just to conclude, I think that Prime Minister Carney has this mandate to diversify trade, to build trade facilitation infrastructure, though doing that will actually improve our leverage with the Americans. And so I think that it will be full steam ahead on a number of those fronts. That doesn't mean that I don't anticipate future cooperation with the Americans. I think we will have that by necessity and by desire. But I think there will be a hesitancy to further increase our exposure to the United States if that's just going to be, pocketed by the president and not treated as a form of partnership. I'll stop there.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Meredith. I'm glad you mentioned also the opportunity for greater collaboration between Canada and Mexico, because we always forget when we talk about this, it's always trade with the U.S., trade with the U.S. But one great experiment has been actually the explosion of trade and investment between Canada and Mexico in the last 30 years. We have the enormous benefit today of having with us Sir Connor Burns, who was former Undersecretary of the UK's for International Trade and Trade Policy, and now has a private practice in Dallas. First of all, Sir Connor, a little bit about the white smoke concerning the UK-US trade deal. What are your views on it? Is this a good sign that can be replicated for the future revision of USMCA, which is possibly going to turn into a renegotiation? But that'll be my next question, and whatever else you might want to share with us. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you, and it's a delight to be here in Houston today at the Baker Institute for my first in-person event since I became a non-resident fellow here last year, after my own Liberation Day, when the electorate relieved me of my elected responsibilities in the UK. And for me, it was a liberation. Can I just quickly say thank you to the team at Baker for putting this together and all the work that's gone into it, and a huge thank you also to our sponsors. Our sponsors at the Nearshoring company, because these things, I know this, don't happen without sponsors. White smoke. I'm obviously very cautious as a Brit to come to this continent and, to mix our metaphors, pontificate. That doesn't have a very good history of landing well. Let's just say a quick word about the UK-US announcement this morning. I think the first thing I'd say is it always is a very good guide to read things in detail before you issue judgment on them. And I think it's way too soon to know the detail of what's in it. It's been put together extremely quickly. Some brilliant officials at what was the Department for International Trade have been working on this for a long time. I was involved in the state-level Memorandum of Understanding program, which was a substitute, a non-legally binding substitute, when the auto pen of Joe Biden said he wasn't interested in doing federal-level agreements. But I want to wait for a little bit and get the detail on it. But what I would say is I'm not totally convinced that it's going to be a huge win, because it's within the context of what President Trump has announced more generally. And I was very struck by a line in an article I think it was in the Telegraph, who described the tariff announcement, dressed up with all the Roman numerals as though it had been very carefully calibrated, but it was a back of a fag packet operation. And it was described as, it's like the moment in The Godfather when Jack Walsh wakes up to find a horse's head alongside him in the bed. The purpose is to frighten and to let Walsh know who's in charge. And I think that is what it is. And I'm worried going forward about what all of this says, not the detail of it, but what all of this says about the perception of America's reliability in the world and the extent to which the rest of the world can take America's word to the bank. The boast this morning from the administration is that the UK's tariffs are going down from 5.1 to 1.8, but America's are going up from 3.4 to 10%. Let's have a look at the detail before we get into this too much. Look, a declaration of interest here. I fell in love with international trade. I want to share a quick story with you. I went to number 10 to the cabinet room the day after Boris Johnson became Prime Minister, and I'd been very close to him in his wilderness year, building towards the premiership. And he sat opposite me, and in that very Boris way, looked at me and said, my friend, I got an amazing job for you. I want you to be Minister of State for International Trade. Get out there and bring me back some full, fat, stonking free trade agreements. I thought, well, this is really exciting. And then I went back to the department to be informed by the gleeful officials that I was Minister of State for Trade Policy. And I discovered quite how complicated trade is. I was very struck when I waded through the 7 lever arch folders of detail, for example, about the multiple tariff lines on girls' dolls, depending on what they were made of, whether they were dressed in cotton, satin, silk, polyester, or mixed fabric. It was complicated and fascinating. And there is a tendency, of course, to fixate on the tariffs, but there's a lot more to trade than tariffs. There's all the tariff rate quotas we heard earlier about in terms of beef. There's all the other restrictions that can be placed on trade between two willing partners by a country that is determined to try and block it. I don't think, for example, I had a better explanation of this than my counterpart when I visited Chile, who looked at me with a twinkle in his eye and he said, Minister, when are you going to have a look at the UK tariffs that are in place to protect the UK's olive oil production? Now, the UK doesn't produce any olive oil. For those of you who have not been to the UK, and I know there are some of you going to Scotland in a few weeks' time, that is still just about in the UK, you will see our climate is not conducive to producing olive oil, nor, by the way, is it particularly conducive to growing mangoes or oranges, which we also have tariffs on. These are legacy things through the EU. I think what I want to say is, aside from all the tariffs and all the regulatory aspects of this, at core, trade facilitation is about human connection. One of the things that I saw work really, really well was when we managed to get states within the US together with regions and mayoral areas within the UK, and you would have exchanges, business exchanges between the two areas. And the sign of success certainly wasn't the opening speeches by the minister or the trade envoy, or even the business leaders. The sign of success was the noise rising at the reception at the end of the formal events. It was the sight of the exchange of business cards, because those were like the planting of bulbs. Those were the seeds that were going to break ground in 3, 6, 9 months, 5 years' time, and would embed those relationships between different areas. One final thing just on the technicalities. Be very careful when you hear about average tariff levels. We're very clever about this in the UK. We have extremely low tariff levels on, for example, seal meat and donkey meat. Now, these are not, in vast demand in the UK, right? But they conceal, because the average is taken, the fact that we have a near 50% tariff on butter, over £1.90 per kilogram. So again, it always does to get stuck in to the detail on this stuff before you finish. Now, I want to end just by saying the cause for optimism for me in all of this is that at core, the human instinct is intact, right? The desire to do better, to look after your family, to pass on wealth to future generations is alive and intact. There's one young man who I had the pleasure of spending dinner with last night, Adrian, who's back there, only 20 years old from studying in Austin. His generation, right, who are the ones that we all ought to be very, very interested in, face the very real prospect that they may be the first generation in living memory to be worse off than their parents. That's why this stuff matters. Free exchange between countries is the best guarantor of ongoing prosperity and diversity. And the words that I want to sort of leave you with are the words of Adam Smith, and I think they are pertinent, particularly to what is coming out of Washington now. And they run, one of my favorite Adam Smith quotes, the uniform, constant, and uninterrupted effort of every person, I should say for today, he said man, but every person to better their condition, the principle from which public and national as well as private opulence is originally derived, is frequently powerful enough to maintain the natural progress of things towards improvement, in spite of both the extravagance of government and the greatest errors of administration. Like the unknown principle of animal life, it frequently restored health and vigor to the Constitution, in spite not only of the disease, but of the absurd prescription of the doctor. Now, my friends, I think that we can still be optimistic because people still want to do better. They want to see a link between risk and reward, between effort and return. And if we can continue to harness with freer trade, greater market access, that human instinct, we will create both personal and national prosperity. Margaret Thatcher summed it up very well, where she said, a man may climb Everest for himself, but at the summit, he plants his country's flag.
Bravo. Bravo, Sir Connor. And that quote by Adam Smith reminds me very much of the debates back in Mexico in the mid-90s, right before NAFTA. And you remember, Roberto, my tocayo Roberto, the big debate back then was the big fish is going to eat the little fish, and we're going to get decimated, and Mexico is going to lose competitiveness. Later on, the debates became much more heated in the United States with the great sucking sound of Ross Perot, and even in Canada also, no, the Mexicans want to steal our water. Well, the hydrological nationalism that sometimes prevails in certain Canadian sectors. And look where we are now. It's allowing that free market access, that free trade, and harnessing that individual effort that has led us to this explosion of trade, also of investment. But one key part of the accord, especially for Mexico, was the long-term institutional certainty of rules of the game that could not be changed at the caprice and the will of somebody like López Obrador or Calderón or Peña Nieto or whomever. There was a certainty there that we were part of a North American rule of law. Luis Rubio called it, we're importing institutional credibility. And now that seems to have been lost with the fact that what you were mentioning about America's reliability. But I think these words are very important to encourage a positive reset of where we should look forward to in expanding markets and also of institutionalizing long-term rules of the game. We have questions and answers, but I'd like everybody's take on this issue. And let's start with you, Roberto.
No, thank you. And I think that it's a very good reflection. And something that I have been listening recently is if Mexico make a mistake like 30 years ago when we opened to the U.S. and if actually all these echoes of these discussions now they were right, and I would say no, it was the right decision. Trade is one of the few things that economists really have certainty that it's good for the economy, it's good for development. And in front of our eyes are events developing and some forces that are against this trade. But I think that our position is not to fall into the cause of closing the economy. Now in this moment, with all this discussion of trade, of be aligned with the U.S., there are some voices, for example, in Mexico that said we have to close our border with China. And I do not believe that this is the good reason. Maybe we are forced to close some aspects of the supply chain to China because that was the rules and the and the conditions that were imposed. But that doesn't mean that it's good. That doesn't mean that Mexico voluntarily has to close its border, because we know that protectionism is bad. It's not good for development, despite what is happening here in the U.S. And I think that's something that we have to keep in mind. And regarding institutions, I agree. I think that we outsource our institutional arrangement to the U.S. and it was something that worked for us. This is not something that we can control, but there are things that we in Mexico, Mexican companies, Mexican businessmen have to do, and we have to learn how to assess the difference between external and domestic risk. We do not know how to read what is happening in the world because we completely outsource this international geopolitical strategy, this institutional arrangement, and we have to develop more intelligence reading these signs of changes that are happening outside and learning how to react to those signs. And I think that a homework that private companies, governments, municipal governments have to learn how to assess those risks and to have like domestic strategies to react against those risks that we are facing.
Thank you. I'd like to shift the order a little bit in view of a question very similar to the one that I asked that I got right now, and turn to Meredith. And the question reads, which is, again, a variation of the one I posed right now. Why should Mexico and Canada sign a trade deal with the U.S. if the U.S. can change the deal at the drop of a hat? A phenomenon that has been called the orange swan. You can interpret that however you want. Meredith, and then we'll turn to David.
Yeah, it's a great question. So we're really conflicted right now because I think while on the one hand there is a willingness to move forward with discussions around USMCA, and Prime Minister Carney did say that in the Oval on Tuesday, for us to move into renegotiating the parts of USMCA that are coming under debate or that are not confrontational. Well, they're becoming confrontational. But the parts that are difficult, the reality is that those things are difficult because they're already politically difficult. So supply management, which is the dairy sector for Canada, super, super difficult. Autos, we rely on it. It is the heart of manufacturing in central Ontario, which is Canada's largest province. And so these are very, very politically sensitive topics for us. And so if Canada cannot rely on the United States to uphold the agreement, and right now it is violating the agreement, then it makes it very difficult for us to renegotiate. And so that's a real quandary for us. Another aspect of this that is a real quandary, and you can see it in the UK announcement this morning, which I totally agree with Sir Connor. We need to wait till the ink is dry to see what this thing really looks like and to assess its value. But if tariffs remain in place going into USMCA negotiations, then tariffs become part of the end game for that negotiation. And so what that means is that the United States gets something for nothing. So instead of Canada negotiating with the United States to, say, become less protectionist on sugar, or to open country of origin labeling, or some of the areas of dispute that Canada has with the United States, instead the U.S. asks things of Canada, and our ask in return is to take off tariffs that are actually already illegal. And so that puts us in a really weak position. So for those two reasons, we're really challenged at the moment thinking about how we want to move forward with discussions, given that even doing so puts us in a negative spot unless tariffs come off preemptively.
Thank you. David?
Yeah, all of that, of course, is I fully agree with. And I think that one of the broader problems that has come out of this first 110 days is a broad question which says, can any of our partners in trade or other agreements depend at all on what the U.S. has negotiated? I mean, obviously, the tariffs on auto, steel, aluminum, and the departure from MFN treatment on the non-USMCA products are in flagrant violation of U.S. agreements. But keep in mind, the U.S. has about a dozen or 15 FTAs, free trade agreements, with Chile, with Peru, with South Korea, with all of Central America. And every single one of them has been violated because they all essentially provide, at least for products that come within the rules of origin, for duty-free access to the U.S. market. And they essentially provide also that for other products, the MFN tariffs that the U.S. agreed to in 1995, which average about 2.5% or 3%, even though there's some spikes, apply to everything else. And, you know, the blueberries from Peru come in now under 10%. They were zero before. The salmon from Chile, and obviously the autos from a lot of places as well. So I see the problem that Mexico and Canada have if they're going to sit down in July of next year and look at reviewing, renegotiating the USMCA. They may be able to get by with some damage limiting provisions. Will they get anything in return from what the Trump administration wants? And what's to prevent Mr. Trump in 2027 from repudiating everything? And keep in mind that the U.S., theoretically with support from Congress, can withdraw from USMCA with 6 months written notice. There's a big question as to whether Mr. Trump could do this himself, but Republicans in Congress at least won't object to anything he does, as far as I can tell. And the Democrats don't have any power. So I think, and this goes well beyond trade. I mean, what about the NATO? What about other agreements, defense agreements with many other countries? I just don't see how realistically it's going to be very hard for Canada, for Mexico, for many, many other countries that are negotiating on trade to figure out, number one, what they're willing to tentatively agree on, like the UK, and to determine whether or not whatever has been agreed upon will still be followed by the U.S. in, say, 3 or 6 months. So I think that's an ongoing problem, and I don't see any immediate solution.
We have about 5 minutes left, and before I turn it to Sir Connor, there are a couple of UK-related questions that I'd like to add to the mix, which is one of them concerning Brexit, and that the exit of the UK from the EU did not seem to bring the benefits promised. What are the lessons for public opinion now? And similar to that is another question on the UK. The UK has been the US's most important political ally since World War II. Again, on the reliability issue, do you see cracks in that relationship? You have 5 minutes. Well, 3 minutes. No.
Okay, look, just really quickly on the previous one, and no appearance by a Brit is complete without a Churchill quote. Churchill said during the last war that there was only one thing worse than fighting with allies, and that is fighting without allies. And I think I twist that on trade. There's only one thing worse than trading with rules, and that's trading without rules. Now look, the World Trade Organization is in many ways a basket case. You know, the dispute resolution stuff there, it takes too long. There are too many national and regional interests that supersede the actuality of the case in front of them. The solution to that is not to walk away from it and not appoint people to the appellant panel. It's to get stuck in and try and recalibrate the international rules-based trading order. I was involved in helping set up and then recruit the chairman of the UK Trade Remedies Authority. Right? We had not had an independent trade policy. I think we had an independent trade policy for 2 months of my life. I was born in September 72. We had to go to New Zealand, right, to recruit our head of negotiations, a brilliant guy called Crawford Faulkner. We gave him a knighthood for it. We were making this up as we went along. And one of the things we were trying to do with our Trade Remedies Authority was to make it faster, because often when there's a complaint, the market has moved on, jobs have gone by the time the bodies report and issue any corrective sanctions or sanction tariffs or introduce quotas and so on. So I would hope that the US at some point will come back to wanting to shape the rules of international trade. I just also say, by the way, one of the worst decisions any country can ever make is to move their trade policy inside their domestic business department. Because domestic business departments aren't there for business. They're there for very big business, which is very different to the people who are the engine rooms of economies. The BPs of the world, they can get round the table with ministers all the time. Politicians don't go out and talk enough to the medium-sized businesses who can be the engine of export. Quick statistic, probably slightly out of date. When I was trade minister, I was told that less than 10% of UK companies exported anything beyond the UK internal market. And of that 10%, something like 65% were accidental exporters. In other words, they didn't have a deliberate export strategy. They had a web presence, somebody happened upon their website, they fulfilled an order, and we classified them as exporters. There's a lot more that countries can do just by informing and working with businesses as to how they can access external markets. Look, on Brexit, right, I voted for Brexit. What I voted for was what we rather tritely call global Britain, right? That the EU is shrinking as a share of world GDP, and there are regions and countries around the world that are going to be the motor of future job creation and growth. And I wanted us to get out there and get stuck into them. When I did the assessment of the UK's trade priorities, I went through 4 things: size of market, potential for growth within market, complementarity and synergy with the UK's offer and the market's need, and then subjectively, the others were broadly empirical, but subjectively, what is the political will to engage with the UK on trade talks? So, you'd want Mercosur if you couldn't get the whole of Mercosur, you'd want Brazil, you'd want the South Africa, Botswana, Mozambique customs union. If you couldn't get that, you'd go for South Africa, etc. I tried to bring some sort of rhyme and reason to our approaches, but what we've done is the worst of all worlds, right? We've left the European Union, but we've pretty much whole-scale kept all the rules and all the tariffs and so on. And I just hope that back home, I'm out of politics now. There's a government that's not of my persuasion, but I wish it well, because I love my country. I want it to do well, whoever is in power. But I just hope that back home in Britain today, there are people in the government who are reflecting on the blossoming of the flowers, the seeds of which we planted some years ago with the India trade talks, with the US, which I welcome. Let's see the details, but I welcome the fact we've done something. I hope they remember that we couldn't have done these things if we were still members of the European Union. So what do I think about Brexit? I still think it's a good idea, and I hope one day soon the UK actually does it.
So it's Brexit for the right reasons, which would bring us back to discussions of nationalistic interpretations of trade and that marvelous version of the Churchill quote, which I think we should etch in stone somewhere around here. And it's part and parcel of looking at the future for North America. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. I would like to share my own contribution to this, which is very, very simple. I think in North America, between Canada, the U.S., and Mexico, we should get rid of the balance of payments calculations. Nothing would change in the real economy, and it would make us sleep a lot better at night, and it would make Peter Navarro a little bit more irrelevant. And I think that's probably a good contribution. What we have here is just the beginning of a much larger conversation that I'm delighted that the Mexico Center at the Baker Institute has started. I think Rodrigo and Tony have done a marvelous job. As a famous British analytic philosopher, J.L. Austin, used to say, this is merely the first word, certainly not the last. So thank you for this wonderful conversation. Thank you to all our panelists. Meredith from Ottawa that joined us. And guess what? Now it's time for lunch. Thank you again.
Sorry to interrupt your lunches, but I hope you're enjoying the food and the drinks and the event in general. We're very we're very happy that you all chose to join us to the very end, and I cannot think of a better way to finish our event than with our very good friend, colleague, and business partner, John Cohen. I like to say that I tell this to whoever listens, and sometimes even to people that don't want to listen to me. But I tell them that I wish that John Cohen would represent all cities, because I do think that if all politicians, all elected officials were like John Cohen, we would be living in a much better world. And I think after you listen to his biography, you will share that same opinion with me. So Mayor Cohen, he's of course a Brownsville native. He did study in St. Joseph's, which is a school with a very long tradition. We actually have more alumni here from St. Joseph in Brownsville. But he then went to study college in Notre Dame, which is not exactly Kansas anymore. And he did great as in many things in his life. He graduated cum laude from Notre Dame. And he then also went to work to New York and Chicago, living the dream. But something that I really admire about John is that he chose to go back to his roots, to go back to Brownsville. And he returned to make Brownsville great, but in the real way. And so John took over the family business, and he has taken the family business Cohen Group to the next level. We feel very fortunate to do business with John. I wish we had all our counterparties to be like the Cohen Group, and you know, in addition to that, that was not enough for Mayor Cohen. He also decided to give back to the community. And so, you know, the first time I went to Brownsville, because I'm not a Brownsville native, the first time I went there, I arrived to the airport, and who was greeting me at the airport? It was John Cohen. But back then, he was a commissioner, I believe. And 2 years ago, in 2023, he ran for mayor of Brownsville. When I found out that he was doing this, I was very excited, because I do think that bringing somebody that has this sense of giving back, and that is doing public service in the less selfish manner possible, and actually you could even argue that he's doing it in spite of what would be his best self-interest from a business standpoint, because you know, being a mayor is a full-time job, and he did it, and it has been the best thing that could have happened to the city. You know, we see it everywhere, and we do wish that you know, everybody could be like him. So again, I cannot think of a better way to finish our event than with the words of the sister city of Matamoros, Brownsville, which, as Jacob was explaining, is one of the highest growing cities in the United States. So thank you, John, and thank you for your words.
Wow. Good afternoon, everyone. That was a wonderful introduction, Armando, and happy birthday again. I was telling people I was missing a shot of tequila before I did this, but it is my extreme privilege and honor to join here. joining you here at the Baker Institute at Rice University, one of our country's premier institutions, to discuss the future of North American trade and economic integration. I want to especially thank my friends Jorge Gonzalez and Armando Martinez from the Nearshore Company for organizing this key event and inviting me to speak to you all. Let me begin by sharing a bit about my background and where I grew up, a city that I am proud to represent, Brownsville, Texas, the southernmost city in our great state. I'm proud to be a sixth-generation Brownsvillian. My third great-grandfather, William Neal, arrived from England to Matamoros in 1820, and soon after, he built the first wood-framed house in Brownsville before its founding, and witnessed firsthand the Mexican War of Independence from Spain, the creation of the Republic of Texas, the Mexican-American War, and the U.S. Civil War. He was mayor of Brownsville twice in the late 1850s and clearly lived through a time of great geopolitical change and turbulence. During his term as mayor, Brownsville had a population of approximately 2,800 people, and it served and continues to serve as a key gateway for trade and commerce between Mexico and the U.S. As we stand here today, Brownsville has currently a growing population of over 200,000 people in a binational metro region of over 3.5 million people that stretches across the Rio Grande Valley on the U.S. side and includes Matamoros and Reynosa on the Mexican side. As we've heard today, we are now facing geopolitical headwinds with the new administration quickly implementing a well-planned agenda focused on nationalism, protectionism, and as a result, isolationism. Despite these challenges, I still strongly believe that we have before us the most opportunity that our city and region has ever had in its history. And the stats show, Brownsville right now is currently the #1 city in the state of Texas for job growth, and we are the #1 city in the United States for income mobility for low-income families, which is, we are breaking the cycle of poverty in our community, which is the goal of, I think, every politician in this country. Our economy, our people, and our infrastructure are deeply intertwined with Mexico's, which provide us with an extraordinary advantage and a tremendous responsibility. We must get this right, not just for our cities, but for the entire North American continent. As we look at the broader picture, we stand at the edge of a fundamental realignment in global trade. Our greatest asset is our partnership with Mexico, which is our nation's largest trading partner. Together, we represent a powerful logistics corridor. This partnership is crucial as it enables us to compete on the global stage with emerging markets and established economies alike. Let me frame it like this. Canada, the U.S., and Mexico are already one of the most tightly connected economic regions in the world. The three countries together trade over $1.5 trillion in goods and services each year. Our supply chains are intricately integrated, and the flows of labor, capital, and innovation do not stop at the border. However, the question now is not where we are, it's where we are going. In the recent years, we have experienced COVID disruptions, geopolitical tensions, and rising costs, which have accelerated a major reevaluation of how and where things are made. This rethinking has led many companies to consider their supply chains and their locations as they seek greater resilience and dependability. The USMCA brought more stability. It modernized rules around digital trade, labor rights, and environmental standards, providing businesses with some certainty. But it did not complete the job. It was a defensive agreement, a patch, not a blueprint. We need to move beyond these foundational agreements and envision a future that is proactive, adaptable, and sustainable. We have entered a new era of proximity, predictability, and production security. Global supply chains are being rewired, and this presents us with a defining opportunity which is nearshoring. This strategic shift allows us to bring production closer to home, reducing dependency on distant suppliers and enhancing our ability to respond to market demands quickly. So let me be clear, nearshoring is not merely a trend, it's a strategic shift. And at the heart of this shift is a logistics and industrial corridor anchored by cities like Brownsville and Matamoros. This collaboration can drive innovation and efficiency, benefiting both economies. The global economy is shifting rapidly, and supply chains are being restructured. AI and automation are redefining work. Climate pressures are driving a green transition. Furthermore, geopolitics are more fragile than ever. In this environment, standing still means falling behind. So what is next? I'm laying out 5 points where I think we need to focus on. We need to think beyond trade deals. Trade is just one component of economic integration. We must align industrial policies, particularly regarding clean energy, semiconductors, and strategic manufacturing. This requires coordinated investments, shared research and development, and streamlined cross-border regulatory frameworks. The importance of collaboration in technology and innovation cannot be overstated. By pooling our resources and knowledge, we can create a more competitive environment that fosters growth. Number 2, workforce matters. The future of this region depends on skills. This is not solely about immigration or education in each country. It involves recognizing credentials across borders, supporting worker mobility, and investing in retraining as industries evolve. Supply chains are meaningless without people. In Brownsville, we are heavily investing in workforce development, collaborating with institutions like the University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley, Texas Southmost College, and Texas A&M to align training with the needs of aerospace, logistics, and advanced manufacturing. Moreover, we must also focus on attracting and retaining talent. This involves creating an environment where individuals feel empowered to thrive, one that encourages innovation and supports lifelong learning. However, we need a regional, bilingual, cross-border strategy for workforce readiness. The opportunity is vast, but we will not seize it without a skilled workforce that is prepared to act. Number 3, infrastructure needs to catch up. From digital connectivity to border logistics, we need smarter infrastructure that facilitates fast and smooth trade. This includes ports, railways, and highways. Projects like the Florida to the Mile Bridge in Brownsville and the deepening of the Brownsville Ship Channel are critical. We also require streamlined permitting, bi-national infrastructure planning, and policy alignment that matches the pace of the private sector. Additionally, we need data standards and energy grids. Reliable electricity and energy are essential. The projects we are witnessing, from LNG to advanced manufacturing, necessitate stable and abundant energy. This means expanding our grid capacity, diversifying sources, and building infrastructure that can support large-scale industrial users. This is not just a challenge for Texas. It is a cross-border issue. Mexico must also address energy access and reliability to sustain the pace of industrial growth. Number 4, small businesses and startups deserve a seat at the table. Currently, most of the benefits of integration accrue to large corporations. We should be creating platforms that empower small and mid-sized businesses to trade, hire, and collaborate across borders. This is where the next wave of innovation will emerge. We need to support entrepreneurship through funding opportunities, mentorship programs, and resources that enable small businesses to thrive in this new economic landscape. Now, with projects like Rio Grande LNG Terminal, which is a projected $18.4 billion development and is the largest energy project in the United States, we are positioning Brownsville as a major energy export hub. Combined with a workforce of over 436,000 people regionally, the narrative becomes clear. And in Brownsville, our economic development arm, the Greater Brownsville Incentives Corporation, is developing a new industrial park on the north side of town, which is 729 acres. We've already invested $12 million in infrastructure and construction. This is not just theoretical, it's real, it's happening now, and it's designed to seamlessly serve both US and Mexican markets. What we are witnessing is regional integration in real time. Brownsville's growth is linked to the future of USMCA, resilient supply chains, and the reindustrialization of North America. Let's also consider Matamoros, which is just across the river and is home to over 100 maquiladoras, employing tens of thousands of skilled workers that produce a myriad of products that cross the border daily. It's not two economies, it's one binational production ecosystem. So we must ask ourselves, what does success look like in the future? I see success as US companies choosing Brownsville and Matamoros over China, India, or Vietnam for the next plant. I see success as a logistics corridor where ships, trains, trucks, and satellites move goods with speed and precision. We need a workforce that reflects our region, young, bilingual, and ready to build. Public-private partnerships that do not get bogged down in red tape, but operate with urgency. And a region that embraces the idea that integration is not a concession, it's a competitive advantage. So let's stop asking what if and start asking what's next. The moment is now. In 2025 alone, Brownsville is projected to generate over $2.29 billion in capital investment from our top 10 projects. We are witnessing some of the fastest growth in high-income households in the country. And we've only developed about half our land in our city. The runway ahead is long, and we are just taking off. The future of North America won't be written in Washington alone. It will be crafted in places like Brownsville, South Texas, and northern Mexico. This corridor of opportunity is where theory becomes action. So our task is clear. We must invest in people, build smart binational infrastructure, strengthen regional cooperation, and move quickly because the world isn't waiting. We need to leverage technology to enhance our competitiveness. Embracing advancements in AI, machine learning, and blockchain can improve our supply chain, transparency, and efficiency. Investing in research and innovation will not only benefit our industries, but also provide sustainable solutions for our communities. The future of North American trade isn't just about another round of tariffs or exemptions. It's about building a next generation economy, cleaner, faster, smarter, and more inclusive. Integration is no longer a luxury, it's a necessity. Let's not wait for a crisis to propel us forward. Let's choose progress now. We in Brownsville aren't waiting. We are building. We are leading, and we invite you to be a part of it. In conclusion, as we move forward, let's remember that our collective success relies on collaboration, vision, and innovation. Together, we can forge a future that's not only about enhancing our economies, but also benefiting our communities and creating a legacy of prosperity for generations to come. Thank you very much.
is now. Thank you. You agree with me about how great it would be to have all politicians and all elected officials be a little bit more like John. So thank you for everything that you do.
Thank you.
John, maybe a question that I think it's a little bit related to what also Jacob was saying earlier. I think it's fair to say that Brownsville and Matamoros lag behind other cities, at the border, even just considering the Mexico, the Tamaulipas, Texas border. But now, thanks to the work that you do and many people do, that is finally seeming to change. But can you speak a little bit about, what do you think led to Matamoros, Brownsville lagging behind other cities in the, like McAllen, Reynosa, El Paso, Juarez, and what can we do to make sure that we fulfill its potential?
So I think at the core of our history, I know Brownsville for a long time was actually the poorest city in the United States, right? And that's because there was lack of investment, not only from the public sector but also the private sector, and our best and brightest did not have opportunity, so they would leave, and so it was basically a cycle of poverty, right? And so now, and also I would say leadership is a big factor in government, and I think having strong leadership now, not only in our city but also regionally, is allowing us to propel our cities to the next level. And I think now that we also have these huge anchor investments in our area, with SpaceX investing $3.5 billion at Starbase, moving their headquarters from Hawthorne, California to right outside Brownsville, we really don't understand what that's going to do to our city. We're trying to figure this out. Their supply chain is being moved to Brownsville. They want to build one Starship every 2 days at their factory, right? They're planning to launch to Mars next year in around November. Let's see if they hold up that timeline. But they need to send 1,000 rockets to Mars to colonize, right? So you look at what's coming and the scale of what's coming to us. I don't know how any city could be actually prepared for this, but we're really trying our best from an infrastructure perspective, from a workforce perspective, to make sure that we can capture that growth in Brownsville, and so that it also benefits the region and Matamoros, so that we all come up together.
Yeah, thank you. And if anyone can, it's you, John. So I think you're up to the challenge. And we were discussing earlier with Roberto your various trips to several cities in Mexico. We actually met in Mexico City some time ago, and after this event, he's traveling to Monterrey for yet another event, just to give you an idea of how much of a work John is putting to make sure that we capitalize on this. But can you talk a little bit about, why, before my perception, I can be wrong, is that this was not done? Like Brownsville and maybe other cities were more focused, north of the border, let's say, and did not try as much this integration that you are pursuing.
That's a great question. When I was elected mayor, one of my first things I did was I went to Matamoros to speak to the Index Matamoros group, and that's the manufacturing association in Matamoros, and they told me I was the first mayor to go and speak to them, ever from Brownsville, which is shocking to me, right?
A round of applause for that. Thank you, John.
But I think I'm fortunate that being a customs broker, being that I go across all the time, that I understand the business climate over there, and I understand how important it is to our region. and why it should be a focus. I think I'm able to highlight the potential that we have, and that the things that we need to do to make sure that we are working in unison, that we're all collaborating, because absolutely we are stronger together. And I don't know, I think previous mayors, they didn't have it as a priority. Maybe they didn't know that side. They didn't understand the potential, but I think going forward, that's absolutely a priority of mine, and that's why I'm going to Monterrey right after this, and that's why I'm going back next week to Mexico City. I think there's an enormous opportunity in front of us when it comes to our relationships with our Mexican partners. That I want them to come to Brownsville. They need to stop going to McAllen and to other Houston, San Antonio. No offense, Houston. But we need to be our own advocates, and I think there's the sky's the limit.
Yeah. Speaking about local to local relationships, the mayor of Matamoros was recently detained, by supposedly, allegedly detained at the border by CBP, and he had some issues also with the visa. How do you go about managing these challenges about a binational relationship, and because not everything is under your control, and we do everything we can, but then life happens?
Well, I think it's, to me, it's, you always have to have relationships no matter who's in power, who's in charge. And I think the opportunities that we have before us, right, when it comes to investment, we cannot take advantage of the full power of what's happening if not everyone's at the table. And I think I'm committed to making sure Matamoros is a part of these conversations, that obviously when companies are coming to look at Brownsville, they understand what's in Matamoros, they understand the supply chain, they understand how to take advantage of the region, right? And I think that wasn't done before either. So I think, these issues that do come up on the political environment between both countries, we have to cut through that and talk about the things that are going to benefit our region, and it's a win-win situation for both of us. So I think we have to continue to be proactive in those discussions and make sure those relationships are open, and we're continuing to collaborate.
Thank you, John. When we met with you, you went through the list of projects that are being launched, in the next, either in progress or about to be launched very soon. And by the way, when I first met John at his office, he was telling me about all of this bright future, and I couldn't help to not be skeptical. I was like, really, John? But that has all materialized. So I was wondering, because maybe for the benefit of everybody, if you could go through the list of the projects, because we were even surprised about how Brownsville even uses seawater as part of to provide water to the city, and those are the kind of things that I don't think everybody's aware of.
No, absolutely. I think from an economic development perspective, I would say if you include the Port of Brownsville and SpaceX, you combine all those projects, it's close to $40 billion of projects, right? And the total value of Brownsville is $10 billion, right? So you're that's a 4x growth in capital investment of our, in the region, right? In basically 1 or 2 years, right? It's transformative. So at the port, I mentioned we have Rio Grande LNG, which is building their liquefied natural gas export terminal, that they're already working on phase 2, and that's going to bring that project up to $30 billion, just that project. And that will be able to export 25% of the natural gas in Texas to foreign markets, primarily Europe and Asia. And then there's another LNG project behind that, which is Texas LNG. There's a refinery that's a hydrogen-powered refinery in the works. It's a multi-billion-dollar project, and they will construct a power plant next to it as well that will help serve power to Brownsville. So that, just in terms of resilience, that will help Brownsville. And then going to your point about our water situation, right, which is a constant concern nowadays. We are at historic lows when it comes to our reservoir levels in the Rio Grande River. The Rio Grande Valley gets their water from the river. Right now it's around 20% capacity. So about 20 years ago, Brownsville decided to build a desalination plant to extract brackish water from the ground, which is has about 10% the salinity of seawater. And we convert that into potable water, right? And so that plant provides 30% of our water. And so we are looking at doubling that plant and optimizing, and that's like a $250 million project. But we have a plan to deal with the water crisis, and I think we are very well positioned to do that. I don't think many other cities in the state have that. So we're fortunate there. Power is an issue for the state, and I think this next legislature will provide more funding opportunities and more planning in terms of being more resilient at the state level, because it is we do have a grid that everyone pulls power from. So if Brownsville has issues, we all have issues, essentially. But in Brownsville, we're already starting to see the effect of what's happening at SpaceX in terms of their supply chain moving. There's a number of suppliers that are coming to Brownsville, and our industrial park that we're building, the first phase is already it's 90 acres, and it's already 2/3 committed, right? Of people wanting industrial property. So all of our industrial space in terms of warehousing is full. So we are trying to get more capacity there. It's a challenge because, as everyone knows, construction prices are high, interest rates are higher, and you don't know if you're going to be able to get those rents in the future, right? So, but at some point, we need developers to come in and build space. And I think there's at least two other private industrial parks in the works. And I think we're also focused at our airport, which is an international airport. We have a $90 million terminal that opened during COVID, and we're focused on, I think that has a very bright future when it comes to cargo, because SpaceX will be, I think, a heavy user of that airport. So we're doing lots of different master planning in our city when it comes to everything from our airport to transportation to our downtown to our park system. We're making sure we have a plan to invest our capital going for the next 20, 30 years. So we're trying to be very strategic about it.
Congratulations. And it reminds me about the two pictures that Jacob showed, like the before and after in New York. And we have not been, we're not Brownsville native, but I can tell you from the time that we started traveling to Brownsville to now, the airport to begin with. The previous airport was like, let's say a very small town beach type of airport. And now it's a brand new, modern, state-of-the-art airport. And if you showed a picture of the before and after, it would feel like what Jacob showed. Like this must be, 50 years must have gone through, but it's actually, very recent. And I wanted to underline, underscore, highlight. It's $40 billion for a city that has 200,000 people. So it is major, right? I mean, sometimes I think, especially because nowadays we have an administration that talks in billions and trillions, like left and right, and you get lost and you don't assign so much meaning to the figures. But 40 billion for a city that is 200,000 inhabitants, it is major. So congratulations. And well, with this, I want to thank you, John, again for everything you do, and I hope you join me in giving him a round of applause.
Thank you.
Well, so I just want to take a minute to thank you all for being here. I want to thank the Nearshore company for sponsoring this project. We're always open to partnerships, so if you're interested in working with us in particular projects, let me know. We're here at the Baker Institute, the Center for the U.S. and Mexico. And I also want to thank all the speakers this morning for being here. I really appreciate your knowledge, your thinking, and your willingness to come to the Baker Institute here on the Rice campus. And I also want to thank the Tecnológico de Monterrey. The Tec de Monterrey has been an incredible partner. We've actually done so many projects over the last 10 years. Tec de Monterrey is really, really an excellent partner of the Baker Institute. We've done quite a bit. And some of them, including two of our speakers this morning, are actually non-resident scholars of our, even though they're in Guadalajara and Monterrey, they come to Houston and we go down to Monterrey. But Rolando still has to invite me to Guadalajara for sure. So I think the conversation will go on. We're focused on North America. We're focused on Mexico-U.S. relations, and we're focused on public policy. So hopefully we can fill that vacuum, especially in these challenging times when so many conflicting news are coming out of Washington, D.C. and Mexico City. Here we are in Houston, and Texas being really the elephant in the room and probably the state that is most connected to Mexico than any other state. You have to remember the $800 billion commercial relationship between Mexico and the United States per year, and I think in the next 5 years it could very well be $1 trillion a year. That's the size of almost, any smaller country economy, and 60% of it goes through Texas, ends in Texas or originates in Texas. So Texas is definitely the big elephant in the room, and I've always said Texas depends on Mexico as Mexico depends on the United States. That's how intertwined Texas and Mexico is. A complicated history if you read the independence of Texas from Mexico, but at the end of the day, we're joined at the hip, and the future is really together. So thank you, everyone. Have a good afternoon, and we'll hope to see you here in our next events. Good.